I know that we had ample discussion, so obviously staff has made the first attempt, and so I'm firmly in belief that we do need to have this updated from the initial property standards one. But, so what words of wisdom do we want to give back to Mr. Early?
Your Honor, I think it needs to be refined, but we've got the basis of a bylaw there. And there's been comments made of it here that maybe will resonate with staff, and perhaps we can, I made a little list of my own things I thought were issues which were either problematic or needed further clarification or didn't quite fit, and I'd be glad to send those in, as maybe all of you do, but I think it should go back to staff.
Okay. Councillor Nix?
Okay, I was actually going to suggest that maybe John could sit down some evening and, well, I'll work with him, or maybe if two councillors took it, and, you know, are we competent enough to put some suggestions in? Do you want to send it to staff? Okay, then send it to staff.
Yeah.
Why don't we do a combination of Ralph's suggestion of submitting our own comments and let staff have at it again.
Does staff have the time and the resources to handle this in the next few months?
I'm comfortable with changes to this bylaw at this point in time. I guess my question to you is are we going with an us and them type bylaw where we have provisions that apply to the rural area and provisions that apply to the urban area? Because that's why it's drafted the way it is. It was kind of middle ground. Obviously, you know, for instance, another bylaw matters. Eugene has gone out to properties and said, you know what, having that abandoned tractor there for parts is not necessarily a bylaw infraction if the guy's using it legitimately for parts. It's a random example, but he does look at the fact that farmers do function in a different world than necessarily the guy who owns a lot in Cardinal Woods. You know, an abandoned tractor sitting on a front lawn in Cardinal Woods is a lot different than an abandoned tractor sitting on a farm, for instance. So that's, I mean, we can wrestle with that, and I can draft it that you know, pull out things that are more urban area and pull out things that are more rural area, but you are getting into a situation where you do have an us and them. And what about those middle ground properties that are about 2 acres sitting on the edge of town, right? So we can certainly take another stab at it. It was put forward as a draft for council's consideration. I think you gave it first reading, did you not? This particular bylaw was given first reading to go to peak, and we can bring it back as for second reading and have. I've wrote down all the comments that were made today. So.
Okay.
I was just going to say, I mean, you've given the draft bylaw the mechanism to do the rural versus more urban idea by defining a residential property. I mean, the mechanics of doing of setting two different standards is already in the draft bylaw. Well, I personally think it wouldn't be a bad idea to maybe there are problems, but certainly a brush pile in Cardinal Woods is different than a brush
Granted.
pile in my property.
Right, but we're also going to get a complaint about the brush pile in Cardinal Woods. We're not necessarily going to get the complaint about the brush pile in the rural area.
Yeah. Well,
I'll take a stab at it, and if you want to give me comments.
So if anybody wants to submit comments to Mark, in addition, to help the rework.
I have a lot of comments from the first round too.
I think it's a very good comment, Mark, about it. The brush pile on my farm, or the brush pile in Cardinal Woods, and yet this thing has got to be relatively bulletproof so that somebody can't, who doesn't like me, can't do me in because I've got this nice brush pile on my farm. I think, so it does, I think it does need to be specific and not, we're not depending upon, entirely depending on whether somebody complains or not. Thanks.
So we have a motion that council receives the Director of Planning's report on the Community Standards Bylaw dated July 19th, 2019. And council refer it back to staff for further refinement. So if I could have a mover, moved by Creelman, seconded by Manchtalo, all in favor? Carries? Okay, so the letter from Chief Justice, Ontario Court of Justice, Highway Traffic Act. Is there anything? Yes.
Well, I'm glad to see this, because what it does is that it acknowledges the Chief Justice's ability to establish fines under Part 1 or Part 2 proceedings, but she punts it back to the government. Had we gone straight to the government, they could have been cute by saying, oh, that's the Chief Judge's responsibility. So I'm not surprised at the outcome, and I think that we need now to sort of lobby once again the Minister of Transportation to consider increases in the fines for speeding and for careless driving. I asked Fred if he would prepare a slide for our benefit, and I don't know if he can bring that up. So my proposal is that we encourage people to write to the Minister of Transportation, Caroline Mulroney, with CCs to the local MPP, as well as an individual who works on issues management for the Minister of Transportation. There's also an option to send letters. Again, the addresses are indicated there. And of course, there's the third option of participating in the Ministry of Transportation's tweet network. So the Community Safety Task Force will take this matter up, but in the meantime, I'm asking that this information be made part of our minutes, and that we work to include something on the website with regard to putting the pressure on the government to do the right thing.
Discussion? Yes?
Significant that Lisa Maisonneuve did not copy her letter to the Minister of Transport? We did, but they don't know that she is punting to them.
It's not surprising, because there is usually a pretty high firewall between the judiciary and the Ontario government. So on something as political as this is, I'm not surprised to see that she didn't copy the minister. In fact, technically the Chief Justice only has contact with the Attorney General, and it's prescribed by a memorandum of understanding, and there is a frequency of the number of times a year it occurs, so I'm not surprised.
Should we recognize her letter in some way, thanking her for her letter and copying it to the ministry?
Well, it may be worth doing a separate letter to the minister enclosing the chief's letter, and I think we should acknowledge the chief's letter, just a short acknowledgement. Thank you very much, and we will take the matter up with the Minister of Transportation.
we do that without a motion?
Just, Fred and I'll draft something up.
I'm also going to AMO, so I'm going to see if I can't get a moment with Ms. Jones or Ms. Mulrooney.
And then in terms of this slide to be put onto the website, what's the decision on that? Sharon? Do you? Yes. Carl?
And I can work to provide some context so that maybe we have a link to the chief's letter and we have a link to the original motion so that people know what we're actually talking about.
Yeah, we'll prepare one of the, we've been working, Andrew's been working on preparing sort of a issues page for the town. We have, similar for planning, we were thinking more broadly based municipal issues page. So this may be one of the launch items on that issues page.
Okay. Yes.
Do you also want to show on there at some point that please provide copies back to the town? I don't think there's anywhere that there's copies back to us. So it'd be nice to know what traction it's getting.
And that's by no means a hard and fast. That was just a sort of a quick and dirty, this is the concept as opposed to that being a finished product. It would vary by the medium we were using.
Okay. Great. All right then, so on to new business. Number one, the site plan agreement amendment for the Orangeville Christian School. And Mr. Trotman has provided us with the overview. And is there any questions? Councillor Nix?
Just a minor one, but I have no problem with 2 portable classrooms. But your comments on whether development charges apply, what happens if there's no time limit specified? You could add 2 portable classrooms and they could be here 50 years from now. I mean, and that is development. So I'm just not sure I understand. Would there be some control over how long these 2 portable classrooms could be there?
I can answer that. I think Councillor Martin wants to weigh in.
Or given a certain length of time and they reapply to keep them there. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, as a
given a
temporary
certain
use.
length of time and then either they're building onto the building or they're taking them away or whatever they're doing.
My experience is they can sometimes reside on a school site for quite a while, until capital plans allow for brick and mortar expansions to schools and where there's ongoing enrollment growth. As for the DCA matter, I mean, I've cited the provision exemption from the Act. I don't know if I have a good answer for you on that one. It's, perhaps
Well, I think
Phil can weigh in on that.
I think if development charges are applicable through our consultant, I think they're applicable. I think this is saying that site plan's not applicable, not development charges. Section 41 says site plan's not applicable. That doesn't
So
include
maybe I
development
misunderstood your
charges.
question.
We'll clarify that with Andrew, and if development charges are applicable now, which I think they might be, then we will charge them.
It is development. We have more traffic, more people in there.
If we charge it and they put them on and then they remove it, they're entitled to a credit.
So is there any other questions of report? Okay. So we have a motion that council receive the report from the Director of Planning dated July 19th, 2019, and considers this as a minor amendment, and that council has no objection to the proposed modifications to the approved site plan as set out in SPA file 2019-04, subject to the following condition. 1, the 2 portable classrooms shall meet the terms and conditions of the executed site plan agreement. 2, submission of an updated certificate of insurance. 3, installation of landscaping per the site plan dated January 7th, 2002, plus additional landscaping to the satisfaction of the town of Mono. And 4, payment of a security deposit is of not less than $5,000 to ensure fulfillment of these conditions. Moved by Martin, second by Creelman. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carries. Okay, estate property donation. Councillor Nix?
I have no problem with this property coming into the town's possession, although I would point out, there's always a cost to owning property. You know, so we're taking on something that and I don't know how the town can ever use it, but what I'm more puzzled about is why we would issue a tax receipt for $11,700 when MPAX gives it an assessed value of whatever, $7,500, and the real estate company says it's worthless. Why would we issue a tax receipt?
That's the current assessed value. The current assessed value is 11.7.
I thought MPAX said 7,500.
When they wrote that.
What?
When that was written by MPAC.
Oh.
It's since, the assessed value has since changed.
But REMAX says it's worthless. So
It's worthless to someone who's looking to build a house on it or do anything with it. It's a piece of land that's sitting between two road allowances at this point in time, and it's undevelopable. So from a strict real estate perspective, it's worthless.
And from the town's perspective, what are we going to use it for? It's worthless to us.
Correct. It's going to form part of our road allowance. It may even eventually form part of the county's road allowance if that's where it gets conveyed. What it also does is it takes a tax bill off our rolls that we're continually fighting going into arrears. Why would you pay money on a property that you know you can't do anything with? It's not the first time we've seen these, right? So there is some efficiencies that happen for us too. At the end of the day, the 11.7 tax donation will ultimately probably be written off on estate capital gains. That's the only rational thing I can see the donation going to.
Okay, so we have motion that council accepts the estate of K. Janice Laverty donation of land at Part Lot 15, Concession 7, EHS Mono, and that the estate solicitor prepare the property deed, and that the treasurer issue a donation receipt in the amount of $11,700, and that the final 2019 tax billing of $57.17 be written off. Moved by Michelot and seconded by Creelman. Any further discussion? All in favor? Carries.
Didn't ask if there's anyone opposed.
Opposed? Recorded. Okay, Southern Mono Hike and Bike Task Force report. It's you, Ralph. It's all you.
Fred's going to pull this up and so we can read it as well as, I'd like to take you through it. As you know, the council proposed a designated hike and bike trail network. The concept was that this would be useful for commuters and for recreation. We had a committee, which was a very active committee. We met 3 times within a short space of time. I was very impressed with the work that they did. For council, Fred and myself sat on it. For staff, there was Jake, Kim, and Mike. And then we had 4 residents, Ron Jasiak, David Moule, David Henry Van Oudenarden, and Stephanie Maggs. It was a good group. Fred, can you leave the map for a little bit? I don't want to blow my talk off right at the beginning. Can you scroll back up to the functions of the committee? So the committee interpreted its functions as being the following. One is to identify the trails that were in Mono. Number 2, to identify what their condition was. So individual members of the committee mostly walked, and biked them, and came back and reported on the condition of the trails. And then the second, third goal was to identify what might make a commuting route in a north-south and in an east-west direction. So the guiding principles, I'd like to just go over them a little bit, is that it would be, the trails should be valuable for walking or biking, ideally for both, but some trails might lend themselves only to one or the other. There should be an interconnected network of trails, and a number of people who were better bikers than myself and more involved with other municipalities pointed out that many of the trail systems just dumped you somewhere and there was nowhere else to go. There was no interconnection between them. And we felt that we had a lot of good trails here and see what we could do with a little bit of connection. Go down to skip number 4 and 5. Somewhere in the translation, that got messed up a bit. We wanted to be able to meet number 7. We wanted the trail system to meet with the Vicky Barron Trail, and we also wanted it to have a connection with Orangeville's trails. It's just about 2 months ago that Orangeville published their master plan for cycling and biking, which was put out by a consulting firm of Dillon, I believe it was, and this is something that they're considering and will consider over the next many years. And we wanted our trails to interdigitate with Orangeville's in particular. Yeah, that's like that, Jim? Thank you. We recognize that trails could have different services. It could be a dirt surface, that's not usually ideal. Could be paved, could be a screenings. Screenings are probably our preferred trail system in terms of relatively easy to manage and giving a good service for both walking and biking. We recognize that trails could be a trail on their own, or it could be a trail which was a part of a road, could be a number of possibilities with respect to roads. One is that the trail is a designated lane, which you have a line on the road and you designate that usually to the right-hand side, that's for biking only. Or it could be just named. There's a term called sharrows where Orangeville's use these, where they put a bike and a double arrow on the trail, on the road. And nobody quite knows what that means, so we've sort of stayed away from that a little bit. Does it mean that bikers have a right of way there, or does it mean that this is where the trail is, or that what should drivers do? Should they be cautious about this or what? So we've stayed away from the sharrow idea, but we do make extensive use of present roads. Signage is very important, and we are developing or have developed a few concepts. One is that the trails would have a mono brand, so that when you saw the sign, you knew you were on a mono trail. It would also identify for you which trail you were on. So it might say Mono South / Purple Hill, or Mono South / Fieldstone. The trails would also, in addition to naming, they would have directional signage, there would be warnings, there would be some distance information, and probably there would be trailhead maps which would show you what lay ahead if you'd like. We also thought that signage should be on the low side rather than having a lot of signs, just as the minimum that you really need to get from one place to the other. We also very strongly felt that we should be emphasizing safety. If you're a biker and you bike on the roads, you know that if you have a collision with a pickup truck, who's going to come out worst? And so encouraging safe biking is really a very, very important part of this. It doesn't apply to walking as much because we don't tend to walk on the roads. So now I'd like to go on to show you 3 maps. The first map, stay with that for a second, please. The first map is the routes for commuter routes, and there's an east-west and a north-south commuter route. There's 2 north-south commuter routes. And then the next map will explain to you what the surface of these routes are, whether it's dirt or roadway, et cetera. And it'll also identify not just the surfaces, but what needs to be done to create these routes. And the third map is with respect to connectivity. So it's not just about routes, it's being able to go for a bike ride or a walk and come back to the same place you started. So that's map number 1. I'll try and use this pointer. Fred, could you zoom it out? That's a bit, good. So we're going to, you can see this, here we are. So this is, okay, this is 16, or the Hockley Valley Road going up here. And this is Highway 10. So we have two north-south routes. One north-south route comes from the Masters Creek. It comes down, crosses the road here. There'd be signage for the road, but there would not be a crosswalk. And this goes on to, I think, what is it, Kingfisher? Kingfisher, works its way down through. This is a really interesting area of walking, because this is, or biking, this is Monora Park. And there's two possible ways that we would access Orangeville. We have talked, Fred has spoken with one of the councillors, Peters. I have not yet met with the staff, but that's my intention, to meet with the staff and have a cooperative approach to the trail system. There's two possible ways that we would become involved with Mona. One is, this is the Hanson development that's quite controversial and no decisions have been made yet. But this is right in here is the plaza, where Metro Plaza is and the other big shops, and it's being renovated. There's a possibility that they would incorporate, the developers would incorporate a pathway through or to one side of their development, which would join with Hanson. Hanson Boulevard is a good biking area. It's well designated, and there's lots of space for it. The other option, which might be best for us in the short run, is to come along here, and we would come down through, is it Starview? Sharon, you know this area better than I do. And it kind of puts you out close to Fred's Tire there. So that's one north-south connected route. It is on roads, except for Monora and except for this area here, which would have to be developed. So our proposal is that initially we would have it to the star here, which would connect you with the Orangeville route. Second north-south route is on this side of the east side of Highway 10. This is Cardinal Woods Phase 2, if you like, or Cardinal Wood East, and it connects it with the present trail system, which is coming down through here when it comes to the dam, and you carry on the Vicky Barron Trail down here. The stars represent communication points with the Orangeville Trail system. So there are basically three here. There's another one down lower. Interrupt me, please, if I'm not clear or there's any questions you have. Route 3 is east-west, and it comes from the far side of Brookfield. Just to identify things here a little bit, this is Island Lake, this is Brookfield here, this is French Drive, this is the Coles industrial area here. So this route would come from here, it would come along French Drive, it crosses the road here. We would have some cross signs. Mike is proposing crossing signs there. This is a three-way stop right there. We think it's reasonably safe. There's a boardwalk on the, right here, my hand won't stay still. That's a boardwalk, which is on the west side, thank you, of First Street. And that boardwalk would be a dismount and walk because it's only about 4 feet wide. One serious consideration is that we would widen that so we could actually stay on your bike. Presently, there's a walkway along here. It brings you into I think it's Old Oak Lane, and we carry on. We pick up into Ashwood, and then we come over here. This is Hurontario, this is Linda, and this is Randy. So between between Ashwood and Randy, there is a trail at the moment, and we would, one part of that is on concrete with it's about 5 or 6 feet wide. It's possible to bike it or walk it, but probably not to pass somebody. And the west half of that is just a grassed-in area right now. And we would propose doing some work on that to create that into a trail system. And then from over here, from Randy to Huron, Ontario, there's a grassed-in area. It's a right-of-way, a town right-of-way, and we propose putting a trail in there with a trail system, which would be screenings. And that would then place you on Huron, Ontario, and you'd connect. We've had Bill Lidster at one of our meetings, and Bill is quite supportive. The details are not really completely worked out, but you would come up here, Ontario, and then you would join with the rest of the system, which would bring you back over to, this is the 4th Avenue. Orangeville Home Hardware is right there, and that would then connect you with Orangeville. So we'd have an east-west system which was here. We'd also have an east-west system which would allow us to go down here, Ontario, and along Buena Vista and cross at the traffic lights there. And that might seem to be a little bit busy, but it's a part of the Orangeville's master plan is to have a trail along Buena Vista. Interestingly, it appears that they presently have put their trail on Mono land. And if they'd like to do that and cover the cost of it, that would be great. So this is the proposal that we'd have 3 routes. One is this east-west route, and the 2 north-south ones that I've shown you. Have the next map, please. So this map, screen it up a little bit more, Fred. Move it up and show me the whole map. Could I see the very bottom, please? Okay. So this is a surface category map. So let's do the first one, is the east-west one. So go to the legend, please, up in the upper right corner. Somewhere up here. That's right. So a little hard to see, but this here, I believe it's red. That's existing road signs, roads. Black is existing earth, and we'd be needing to upgrade them. So this is important that we look at this today because it relates to potential work that we could do. And this is, blue is existing concrete walkways or screenings that are with trails that are already present. This is a trail system which is not the town of Monos. So let's go back to the lower portion here. Right. So this is on the road. This is on French Drive. We've considered whether or not to have a designated bike lane there. And the pros of that are that this gives some significant safety to bikers. The cons are that it would mean no on-the-road parking, and it might not go over well with the residents at this time, understandably. And our thought was that we would designate this with appropriate signage, but we would not have a separated lane. And as the biking and walking increases in volume, we might change our mind about the designated lane. But at the moment, this is on the road all the way to here. This is the area that we talked about that is already a very nice screened laneway coming in here. And now we're up to Ashbridges, and now we come into the area where we need to do some development. Could you zoom in on that, please, Fred? So there's 2 areas that need development. At present, there is a walkway, a concrete walkway here. This is Randy, and this is Linda. So this is from Ashwood to Randy. There's presently a walkway, and then there's a 100 meters or so of grassed area here, and we're proposing that that's a town right of way. We're proposing that we would put a screened pathway there, a couple of meters wider, so to complete the route through here. Then we have this road here, and we come again to an area where we need to put another screened pathway in, and this area here is between Randy and here, Ontario, and it's a town right away, and there's lots of space there. It is presently grassed, and one of the neighbors mows that on a regular basis, and they probably have some feeling of ownership by virtue of care that they've done for the last 20 years or so. We're proposing that we would create 2 screened areas here and here. And maybe I should jump ahead a little bit to talk about cost because it's applicable at this time. We have a grant which is for $44,000, which allows us to do this type of work. And this screened walkway here and this one here, Mr. Dunsmore's estimated that at a cost of about $29,000. Let's go up to the left-hand side, please, Fred. We'll look at Menora Park now. There's nothing that needs to be done in the Cardinal Woods on the east side except signage. Go a little more right. So as we drop down Kingfisher, we get to Menora Park here. There would need to be some work done here. There is a road, this is the, for those of you who know the Menora Park, this is the pond, this is the dam. As you come south there, you come on a fairly main thoroughfare here. It's, I guess, Sharon, it's the 401 of Menora Park, but it's not great biking at the moment, and we would need to have discussions with the Mona Nordic, and there would need to be a fair bit of work done here, and that would be something that we think should be budgeted for a future date to create this as a continuous trail here. The other thing that we need to do is talk to Orangeville about this area here, because our feeling is that this is in a proposal stage. It's a stage where you can ask the developer to do many things as they're looking for an opportunity, looking for agreement to the town to go ahead with the proposal, and that Orangeville should be asking for this to be put in fairly soon. In Orangeville's master plan, they do show this as being a connection with something up here. They don't show any of the trails outside of Orangeville. So I'd just like to pause there a little bit if there are any questions, because this relates to what we might do in the fall. I didn't mention on the principles that we do want to have a public meeting. Would like to have the public meeting in September, and we particularly would like to be sure that the people that are on both sides of the proposed renovations over in Fieldstone have a chance to weigh in on their thoughts on what is proposed.
Just a quick question about the grant. Is it applicable to signage as well as?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
And it's time limited to March the 20th, 2020. So hence this is giving some momentum to her. Yes, and thank you, John. And signage for all this area, except for probably trailhead signage, is estimated at $12,000. If there are no further questions, let's go on to the final map. This map shows you the connections that you can make with other trail systems. I'll go back to Island Lake, where we're all familiar with. It's proposed that we would have a trail in here. This is a part of the Island Lake Trail. Island Lake.
Okay, so we have item 4, Shelburne District Fire Board resolution to recover expense in insured perils. And it's regarding the Fire Marquee Company. Did you want to say anything to that, Fred?
Sharon does.
No, Fred does.
Well, you're going to have a deputation on the September 10th meeting from both Brad Lamac and Chris Carrier to talk about this issue. I will just say that at the meeting Sharon and I attended, we were quite impressed. We'd heard their presentation 3 or 4 years ago, and we didn't go for it. Because at that time, we were under the impression that it would be up to each municipality to go after insurance companies. But as I understand it, if Shelburne District Fire Board signs this contract with Firemark, we just sit back. We had 22 structure fires last year, and I don't think we got any. Every insurance policy is different, but most of them have some coverage for the cost of a fire call. It might be a maximum of $1,000, it might be more. It might be unlimited in some cases. Firemark's specialty is that they know all these insurance policies, they know the insurance companies. We collected 0 last year at the Shelburne District Fire Board. Firemark thinks it's quite reasonable that we could get anywhere from $5,000 to $14,000 more a year in revenue. Now, there are ties to this revenue. It cannot be used by the fire board to offset what the taxpayer's paying for at the fire department. So, or like operating costs. It can cover some operating costs. It can go into things like a reserve fund for capital. It can go into special things like for training that we are not now, suppose there's a second level of training that our volunteers aren't getting, like, what do you call the drugs, or some specialized training. Why does this thing keep beeping at me? We could use it for that. So there are conditions on what you could use this extra revenue for. But the main point is this: we're not collecting any of it right now. So Brad, our fire chief, was quite strongly in favor of us signing this contract. What I asked Firemark, and the reason we're going to get a delegation, and I don't know the answer to this yet, is what happens if a municipality signs a contract with Firemark? Because then we could get all 4 of our areas covered. It would mean 0 revenue for Mono. But it would mean we were getting more money from insurance companies that would go out to our 4 fire departments. Now, the reason I ask that is because Agila Toronto has already signed a contract with them. So I guess that's what Chris Carrier is going to explain on September 10th. I don't know whether the contracts have to be with the fire departments or with the municipality, but clearly they are signing some contracts with municipalities. So, subject to me learning something that I don't now know, I think the battery must be getting low. I don't know why it keeps beeping at me. I think it would be a good idea for Mono to sign it. Again, it would mean 0 revenues, Mark, for us. We can't collect any of this money. But it would mean every time there's a structure fire, this only applies to like house insurance or insurance on a building. It has nothing to do with automobiles, nothing to do with any other type of fire call. Firemark goes after the insurance company, collects the amount as per the policy, which are quite complex and varied, and they take 30% and they give either us or the fire department 70%. So again, subject to my learning something that I don't now know, I think it's something we should explore. So they'll come on September the 10th and explain this to us.
I thought that we, as a town, were collecting some insurance monies. That was, we explored this at Rosemont.
Mark, I asked Les that question.
They,
He says we're not.
We do not collect for structure fires.
Yeah.
Right, we take the position that a structure fire is what you're paying for through your tax bill to make sure you've got a fire department ready to respond to your house fire as part of your taxes. We are very aggressive when it comes to calls for fires, say, on a public roadway, on a county roadway, on a provincial highway, false alarms. I mean, we collect almost, I believe it's close to $175,000 a year clawing back from Orangeville and Caledon rates. So we're very aggressive in that regard, but what we don't go after is the actual structures on a property, because we've just taken position that that's what you are paying for as part of your taxes.
Sorry, what is it we go after, Mark?
A car accident call on the highways, or even on our municipal roadways. We'll go after the drivers and the people involved. False alarms.
Got a crow trying to get through the window at you.
Yes. Yeah. So it's just we've never gone after the structure fires, so that would be the change that we'd be looking at.
so I guess we'll wait for that delegation and then we can make our determination
It'd be
then.
great if Orangeville could do something like that. I mean, that's the majority of our calls.
Yes.
And if they were to start collecting on structure fires, whether it's in Mono or East Fairfax or even in Orangeville, it would be helpful to us because it would offset their overall budget.
Yeah, we thought about pushing it there with twos.
But remember, it takes some of the pressure off your budget, but they can't use it to say start paying salaries or.
That's where you're losing
Totally.
me, and I'm not sure where
Yeah.
that information's got. That's why I wasn't gonna say anything until I heard the presentation, but we just, we put it right back into the budget as revenue.
Okay, Chris will have to explain it to you. And full disclosure, John, because I don't want to sound like I'm advocating something. I've known Chris Carrier for 25, he used to be the chair of the NVC when I was the vice chair. So,
That sounds good.
but I'm not on his side on this. It's only if it's a good deal for Mono.
Sounds interesting.
Okay, so item 5, repealing topsoil bylaw 94-4. So it's relatively self-explanatory. So we have a motion that we repeal bylaw 94-4, being a bylaw to protect and conserve topsoil within the town of Mono. Do I have a mover? Martin, seconded by Nix. All in favor? Carries. Okay, so now we're on to Schedule A. Ralph, do you want to start? Okay. Fred, do you have any?
Not really. I read the Dufferin Business Issues Survey results with some interest, but the one I wanted, and maybe John can, or I've already asked him this, but it's the Oakville resolution. I just wanted to, because I didn't totally understand what the resolution was all about. I'm intrigued at the thought that municipalities could get into the business of administering, I guess, administrative fines for traffic violations. And John has told me, John, why don't you speak to it? Because I didn't know about this county effort too, which I think is very interesting.
Both Oakville and the City of Toronto want to use, both Toronto and Oakville want to use photo radar. And they realize that to bring photo radar back, which would be a relatively easy thing to do because it's never actually been taken out of the Highway Traffic Act, they would obviously have to get provincial approval. But they would like to see photo radar fines come through a so-called administrative penalties scheme, which keeps it out of the courts. But it requires the appointment of a hearing officer and an appeals officer. And Mr. Dre, who we work with occasionally on prosecutions, actually does this work for a municipality. He is a hearing officer. So there are places that have already established administrative penalty schemes. Dufferin is looking into it. And then it would offer that service out to local municipalities for things such as bylaw infractions, and parking would be a big one. And it is used now extensively for parking, so-called Part 2 citations. So the only problem with the Oakville resolution that I can see is that they seem to be under the impression that if it stays in a POA mechanism, that they don't get the money, whereas if it's administrative penalties, they would get the money. They get the money either way, minus the cost of administration. So I would hesitate to, as we've talked about, I would hesitate to endorse their motion only because it's got a small glitch in it.
But my thought going down the road is if this works and if the county gets a hearing officer, we can enforce speed limits or have photo radars enforce speed limits on our roads and county roads. And given the troubles that we're having with Airport Road, which, I mean, thank goodness the OPP, the job they're doing this year, I think we're up to 20 or 25 stunt drivers so far this year already on Airport Road, aren't we? It's more than that. And I mean, it is a dangerous road. And even if we had photo radar up there, you know, for a week a year, but if we could put a sign saying photo radar, it might do something to the speeders.
Yeah, so the administrative penalties would not be applicable to speeding charges. Those would still be laid under the Provincial Offences Act, the Highway Traffic Act to be precise. But where it would come into play is if we did get approval to do photo radar, we'd be responsible for the cost and installation of the equipment. The province wouldn't do that. But then presumably we would derive the income from it minus the cost of administration.
Okay. There's nothing else? Ralph, did you find what you needed?
Well, you know, I was just struck by one, one item, I think it's numbers, lost the number, but it's about the public health directive on alcohol. And it always surprises me, I've heard this before, but it surprises me the financial impact of it. Alcohol costs society more than any of our other problem areas. Tobacco, which I think of as being probably quite huge, opioids, cannabis, et cetera. And this is if you look at criminal care, you look at health care, you look at the loss of work, all the various effect on families, et cetera, that alcohol is a really big problem. And it's one of the interesting things, we look at cannabis because it's coming in new, but alcohol's been with us for forever. We accept it. I drink alcohol, beverages, probably most of us do. And it's a part of our life, but it is a big problem too. That's it.
Okay. John, did you have anything?
I do. Item number 19, the motion from Township of Melanchthon having to do with community safety and well-being plan. They seem to want to put the county in a driving role here, which I agree with, quite frankly, because most of the agencies that are involved in this are somehow associated with social services, and that is the county's area. I'm just wondering if anything ever came from the meeting with Sylvia Jones where she seemed to have a different view than her bureaucrats as to whether we are all expected to independently come up with plans, whether we can cooperate, or whether we can look to the county to form a committee and do this work. My recollection is that she was going to get back to us.
Yeah. So Mark, have you heard anything further from her?
When I was off, it had just blossomed, and everybody was basically passing resolutions for it to go to the county, and the county's, I think, was ready to carry on, but I've never heard anything back from Sylvia. I'm wondering whether Sonia got direction different from what we
Yeah, 'cause-
originally received on their presentations.
Yeah, because Sylvia had said to us in our meeting that basically she didn't want 8 different plans,
Right.
cookie cutter approach. It made more sense to be collaborating.
But yeah, no, I've never seen anything formal back from her, and it's
Well,
following up.
that's logical, except that I was at a joint police services board meeting where this issue came up, and it was stated there by staff from a number of municipalities that the direction clearly was that the county not be the driver in this, that they were looking to have different plans from different municipalities, which makes no sense
Which is what the
whatsoever.
and then I went to the webinar about 2 weeks later, and it was the same.
Yeah, so
Went to-
obviously
Did the webinar.
somebody's not on the right page.
I'll follow it up.
Okay. All right, and Sharon, do you have anything?
Nothing new because the two things have been discussed already, but it seems astounding to me that we're still talking about alcohol and alcohol-related problems and how much it costs us to sustain it through health, through people driving around when they shouldn't be, and all of that kind of thing. I found that extremely interesting. And also, there's a lot of education about how alcohol can affect a person physically, mentally, shouldn't be driving, all those kind of things, and yet we still have these issues. And the other one was the well-being thing, and I was quite, I thought that was great to have it done by one group, because they're all going to be basically the same, so it doesn't really make sense to have 8 different groups sitting down and hammering something out. Doesn't really make sense.
Okay, so if there's nothing further, we have a motion that we accept Schedule A to this agenda. Moved by anybody? Creelman, seconded by Martin. All in favor? Carries. Okay, so the reports from staff and council members. So, David, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Thank you, Mayor. And not really at this point. There's a lot that's still ongoing that I think I've already previously mentioned. So nothing substantive at this point.
Okay. How about you, Kim?
Just to let council know that the ball diamond upgrades, which we had spoken about back in May, June, they will be completed this week. So that's new players' benches, new fencing to protect the players. So, and that's at the courtesy of the Headwaters Baseball League. So that is going on this week at both Cardinal Woods and Mona Center Parks, Diamonds. Also is to let, I don't think I let council know this a few weeks ago, but just for your information, all the new pet waste systems have now been installed at the parks and at the trailheads, so there are plenty of opportunities for people to dispose of pet waste in those areas. And the third thing is to let council know on a budget item that we had, which was for the crossing at Purple Hill Park into Island Lake Park. We had a crossing there where it was really in bad shape, and we had put $5,000 into the budget to upgrade that crossing. I have now met with CBC, and we've come to an agreement that we're going to
Northwest corner of the park?
Hours, and I think about some poor woman down in a well, getting the water for her whole family, climbing back up, walking God knows how far. I think we were definitely born lucky to be here, and we need to take care of it. So that's up to you and you.
Okay, so we're on to notices of motion.
Yes, I thought too. So I'll type these out and divide them with Fred. My first notice of motion has to do with existing bylaw 95-16. That it be amended to conform with the spirit of the Fish and Wildlife Act. That, and I have this in quotes, and it's a paraphrase from that act. A person shall not, during a period from half an hour after sunset to half an hour before sunrise, discharge a firearm in the town of Pomona. What the Fish and Wildlife Act actually says is that you can't hunt at night. What I'm saying here is that one should not be discharging firearms in the middle of the night or when it's dark. And it would require an amendment to the bylaw that currently only governs discharge of firearms on Mono property. But this would be applicable to all lands in Mono. So that's the intent.
So, sorry, John, are you saying you want to discharge a firearms bylaw for the entire municipality?
Yeah, well, I want to see if we can take our existing bylaw that deals with Mono property only and add to it a provision that discharge of firearms in the town of Mono after sundown and before sunrise is not proper.
Well, I think you'd probably, I can look into it. I know it's just a notice of motion, but my gut is it would be a discharge of firearms bylaw, not because that
A standard.
9516 just deals with all of our municipal lands.
Okay.
And
Well,
operations
if
on
it
municipal
takes-
lands,
If
I
it
mean-
takes a standalone bylaw, I'm fine with that.
Okay, I mean, the last time we did that, we had the room was full of orange jackets and hunters.
But they don't hunt at night, do they?
So, no, it was that was more of a prohibition bylaw at that time, so.
Right,
yeah.
I'm just talking about at night.
Okay,
So
fair enough.
everybody knows.
Yep.
And I have a second notice of motion to the bylaw. Oh, sorry.
Anglers and hunters, they have we did have a discharge of firearms at about 6 o'clock in the morning. This is going back to the fall. And, well, some people up who were in Orangeville, because it was so, such an odd thing to have happen. And Chris McCoy, I talked to Chris McCoy, and they could tell exactly who it was. So someone was going in there. They have a system now when you go through.
Card system.
Yeah. So, so that stopped immediately. And I'm not sure, I think it's 10 o'clock during the week and maybe, I think it's noon on the weekends before they're shooting out there. So, and I've never heard anything from them at night, but we did have 2 nights in a row, someone shooting, and it was bang, 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 bang. And there was no question, it was not, we had talked to other people, it was not fireworks. But it's almost impossible to find out where it would be coming from. So to have it in our bylaws would certainly make it something we could call out.
You might run into some issues with respect to what you might call varmint control. But the only time that I discharge a firearm is after sunset. And it's been when the coyotes are after my sheep. And I'm afraid it's my best way of controlling beavers too, and they don't come out until it's after. So the sunset is not a good termination point for me.
Can I insert the word recreational discharge of firearms?
Sure, absolutely.
Seriously, because the situation that moves me to propose this, there was a situation nearby where the OPP was called and told there was going to be target practice, and was that okay? And they said, oh, thank you for calling, we're really, that's very helpful. And then 50 gunshots later, after dark, and the OPP is looking into whoever at their end gave the okay for this activity, because even they found it strange. So I would say recreational, and I think that covers off your varmint control. Although you would be in contravention with the Fish and Wildlife Act.
Okay, so you're.
Second motion. Notice that bylaw 2004-69, the bylaw to regulate the setting of fires, be amended to increase the allowable size of the material to be burnt to 3 cubic meters from its current size of 1 cubic meter. I don't know where the 1 cubic meter came from. I don't think it was in the original fire bylaw that we developed at the end of the 90s. But I think all of us with properties that where we've burnt brush have probably been violators of this provision big time. So I think it's time to recognize that the size can be a little bit larger, and I think 3 cubic meters is large enough at any given time. And I hope this opens a discussion of that bylaw in general, because there may be some other aspects of it that we can improve upon.
Mark, would you remember if that was a recommended size from a fire chief?
I don't know the date back, honestly. 2004. But I've never been a proponent of the permit process, so, I mean, other municipalities have just not gone with it and just make it blanket across the municipality, but I do not know. I'll see what I can find. This will be a search that may have no end, but I'll see what I can find out, whether it came from the fire department or not.
This is separate and apart from whether or not we issue a permit.
Oh, I totally understand. I'm just.
Like there are municipalities that have just done away with permits altogether, and they simply have a burning bylaw.
Right.
And they expect people to follow it. My recollection is I worked on the fire bylaw in the 90s. I don't remember a limit to the size of the fire, and this one is dated 2004, so it may have come in at that time.
Right. I don't recall, but I can certainly see what I can find. Two?
Okay, so you're done?
Yeah.
Okay, and you will get the printed format for
Yep.
Mr. Simpson? Okay. So we're now at the point to move into in-camera, that council move into a closed meeting pursuant to Section 239 of the Municipal Act 2001 as amended at 1:27 PM for personal matters about an identifiable individual, including member municipal or local board employees, appointments to fill committee vacancies. So moved by Nix and seconded by Martin. All in favor? Carries. Thanks, Jim. Moved by Magtalo, seconded by Creelman. All in favor? Good night.
Okay, so we're done. Are we gonna be building Ford's Ferris wheel in the town?
Why not?
Remember how we
Put it on smoke, maybe put it on Smoky Creek. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to those in the gallery. And just to remind everyone where the emergency exits are. At this time, we are video recording our meetings, but they are not being uploaded onto YouTube at this time. There seems to be some problem. But at any rate, we were working through that. We have regrets from Mr. Aluka and Mr. Dunmore for today's meeting. As far as disclosure of pecuniary interest can be made now or at any time throughout the meeting, and it needs to be done in writing to those on council. We will attempt, if necessary, to have a break at 10:30, and as to the length of the agenda, we have said we will have a lunch break at 12 so that we make sure that everybody is well nourished. So at this time, I'd like to ask for approval of the agenda. So we have a motion that council approves the agenda of session 14-2019 as circulated, moved by Creelman and seconded by Nix. And is there any additions, deletions? I'm seeing none. All in favor? That carries. And the next one is approval of the previous minutes. That council approves the minutes of session 12-2019 and 13-2019 as circulated. Is anyone prepared to move? Moved by, okay. And a seconder, Creelman. And so you had a question?
Well, I think maybe Sharon, you want to ask a question? It was only in that list of what, the list of what we did or did not say about the Island Lake Family Park. I admit I didn't make notes, and the person who did make notes is not here today, but there was one item on that list that I don't remember us saying that about the beach volleyball court. But I could be wrong, I just didn't remember it. And I certainly know when we did the site visit, my understanding was it was going to stay there. So I don't know how accurate it is, and maybe it's not that important. It's just that, okay, that's all I've got to say. I wasn't sure that was inaccurate.
Okay. And how does the rest of the members feel?
Well, I would delete that item because I don't think that was a part of our general agreement at the council meeting.
Mike?
I agree with Ralph. I'd delete it. We were musing out loud as to whether we should keep it or scrap it, and I think that no decision one way or the other was made on it. But there was discussion of its continued merits.
Right. So if that's the case, then the motion would be as amended with that correction. And Mr. Simpson?
So you want that, all reference to the beach volleyball court removed or changed to read something different?
I don't think there was a decision, so it should just be removed,
Okay?
right?
Yeah, I mean, we discussed quite a few things, so. Okay, so if that is acceptable, call for the vote. All in favor? That carries. And at this time, we have public question period. Is there any questions from anybody in the gallery? Seeing none then, we have our statutory public meeting at 10, so we will carry on then with unfinished business and deferred items. The first item is the 2019 Development Charges Bylaw, and that has been circulated with a recommended adoption. Is there any questions or discussion? Yes?
Can I just ask a simple question? I ran through the new bylaw. My understanding is the wording is essentially identical to the last bylaw, and the only change is in the rates, right? I was going to get the old one up and do a sort of side-by-side comparison, but that was
One from 5 years ago?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's more or less a
Okay.
boilerplate.
That-
There's been some minor changes to the definitions for how we treat some items, such as farm buildings, gas stations, was like the overheads, the canopies at gas stations were not considered a building before. We've added that in so that we could collect that as part of the DC with that as well. And just the definition of farm building, so it's more concise.
Okay, thank you.
But there was a reason for being more concise on the farm building from the standpoint of tightening that up?
Correct.
Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion that we introduce and give the necessary readings to a bylaw for the imposition of development charges, that it be signed by the mayor and the clerk for the town of Mono, sealed and engrossed in the bylaw book. Could I have a mover? Moved by Mantalo and seconded by Martin. Any further discussion? All in favor? That carries. Item 2, the revised site plan for Island Lake Family Park. So we have the memo from Ms. Heaton, and so I'll open the floor to discussion, yes?
My view is, with the original motion that Ralph and I prepared about what elements we wanted in the park, with the plan that Kim presented us, which I thought was a very fine plan, with the discussion we had at our June meeting, you know, the suggestions made, and then with the site visit, I think we're actually all coming together on this, and I think Kim has enough information on her desk to simply go back, tweak the original plan, and bring us back a new plan. And that would be my suggestion. I don't, you know, I particularly at the site, well, yeah, that's my suggestion.
I agree with all your inputs, Fred. I think that at the July 15th walk-around, we had a chance to visualize each of the major parts of the project where they might be and might not be. And I think we had some changes of thought there on the locations. And there were some other ideas which came up. And so I'm not sure that we've given Kim, shall we say, a clear idea. I think it's probably pretty fuzzy. And so my suggestion is that we would take each of the proposed items and we would just discuss it. Do we want for example, the tennis court, do we want it up in the northwest corner where we talked about it? Or after a while on Monday, I think we didn't make decisions, but we were getting an idea that maybe it should be further south. We talked about the parking, and then we have to make a decision on that, and I think she needs direction there. So I'd kind of suggest that we do each of these things in order, Your Honor. Take whatever, we have the first one there is the pathway. And also we need to talk about what we're going to do in terms of development on the the east side, because we had some good ideas there when we did that walk around there.
So, is that fine that we proceed with the list on the memo? Okay. So, item 1, convert the north-south pathway from a loop to a single path by eliminating the east portion of the loop. Is that agreed? Okay. And place the picnic shelter adjacent to the remaining portion of the path, favoring the southern section. Yes?
I've had some feedback, and I think it makes some sense, and that is, instead of having one large structure, that maybe two smaller ones, hopefully not exceeding the cost of one large structure, might afford, as an example, two families having a picnic as opposed to having to share the single space together. So I just throw that out there as a possibility.
If I could just have clarification as to what your definition of small is. Is small something that accommodates 2 picnic tables, or small something that accommodates 8 picnic tables? I need a definition, please. Because I'm not sure where you're going with that. My other suggestion on that is that your picnic shelters, I have been back out at the park again, is a location where they're going to have a view of the lake. I thought that would be really nice, so that the people, when they are picnicking, can see the water.
So did you have,
I don't have any firm views as to the size, just the concept of two structures, maybe one up near the tennis courts and the other down near the play equipment, that would afford the opportunity for, as an example, 2 different families enjoying the space rather than having to share one large structure.
I support that idea, and I did talk to Mr. Dunsmore about costing. As you know, that came up at the last council meeting, and he suggested that the smaller ones, which are much more lightly built, would not cost as much likely as a large single one. And Kim, I thought a little bit about the tables, and I think something that had probably 3 or 4 tables would be what I consider small.
Thank
I
you.
don't know whether you agree.
so move the tennis courts to the northwest portion of the park. Sorry.
So, Kim, did you have the idea of having one of these covered areas sort of at the top through the grass that we're leaving? So sort of at the top on the other side of the path, so further west? Was that one of your ideas, so that they can see the lake from there? Is that?
I had done up just a very draft plan after the walkabout, and I've located it basically, what would it be? Oh, gosh. Northwest of the playground equipment and just south of the playing field. You would get to it via the walkway. There'd be a walkway established off to it. I mean, this is just, and if you want a second one, I can certainly put one up by the tennis courts. This is just something that I quickly put together after our walkabout.
So it wouldn't be anywhere near the backyard of the Blue Heron
Oh,
residence?
gosh, no.
Removed further north and further
So it's
west?
further away than the playground equipment. It's to the northwest corner of the playground equipment.
Okay,
Presumably on the trail,
Yeah, just
Yeah.
to the,
just off to the side of the trail.
Yeah.
okay, item 3, move the tennis courts to the northwest portion of the park. Yes?
I think that was good, and when we saw it, and Kim said even you know, angle it so those trees are more of a windbreak. I think that was a good idea.
I have concerns about where people are going to park. They're going to, but that's further on down in here, but I guess we still have to talk about parking because when you go to any other tennis courts in town, you don't walk far to get to the tennis court, actually. It's right there. And I'm thinking if they're parking in the south parking area, then it's a bit of a jog up to the north. It's,
Well,
you
one
know,
of the other
I liked the way, I liked the siding, I liked all of that. I just had some concerns about parking.
One of the other things which you haven't gotten to the actual parking spot yet on the walkabout was the possibility of moving the parking into the fielded area about halfway between the two, which is something else I've reflected on here, and I've made it so that there's enough to fit 18 cars. So removing the parking that is presently there, turning it into a two-way drive, and bringing it out onto the fielded, or the tall grass part, not very far out, but bringing it out onto the tall grass part and turning it into a 25 meter by 15 meter parking area. That's where I've put it for now.
And again, that means that there's plenty of tree coverage for the people who are on Blue Heron.
Oh, yeah.
That's a
Yeah,
great
so
spot.
It's not within their sight line.
Okay, so then, that means item 4 and item 5 are revamped to your suggestion of up to 18 cars.
So that's a single parking location? Okay.
And you're removing the north entrance, utilizing the well access.
And the only other thing, Kim, and I'm sure you've got it, was that driveway to the parking lot is also the walking trail. They're one and the same thing at that point.
So I've got that part of the driveway is part of the walking trail, but then we've got a separate trail veering off, heading towards the playground equipment, and then it goes up and around and connects up with the actual trail. But there's a paved driveway that I'm not using the driveway as part of the trail halfway through the park.
Okay. So item 6, that is not being considered. We are going to keep the volleyball court. 7, so the multipurpose pad concept, you have also highlighted it farther down at the off the Meek Avenue trail system that we did on our walkabout.
I have incorporated a multi-purpose pad into
Yeah.
the diagram here for.
Yeah,
Into which the Island Lake Family Park or the Parkette?
no, the Parkette.
Okay.
Oh, okay, so, sorry, then we need to talk about that, because I thought and this is good that we're having the discussion, my understanding was that the Parkette was to look at a half court,
Yeah,
which is like basketball, and
Yeah.
so I have investigated a half court
Mhm.
for the Brookfield
right.
Parkette, but no multi-purpose pad at Island Lake then.
No.
Got it. Okay.
Okay. 8, washroom facilities to be portable. Yes?
So are we investigating what CVC, the building that they have at the end of, okay, I'm interested in that for sure. And any storage could be added to that or right beside it anyway.
Okay. Investigate other options for storage. So I think with the discussions on our site visit, Mr. Dunmore had concerns about using the well house. So we just basically have to leave it up to you, Kim, to figure out where storage
That's-
could
yeah.
happen?
Mhm.
Yes?
But I like the idea of it being in conjunction with the portable washrooms, only to reduce the proliferation of structures,
I
standalone
put it here
structures.
beside washroom.
Yeah, that was
Suggested.
my reasoning for suggesting the well house, but obviously that's problematic.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, and then item 10, no outdoor fitness equipment. And 11, evaluate the need for a berm along the north-south pathway. Yes.
Yeah, I think we agreed to that, so it was just a suggestion that came up, is if there is excess fill when we level the playing field, then the alternative to building a berm would be to put it out in the tall grass area, whether it's a minor or major toboggan hill. But if there's excess fill, it has to be put somewhere, right?
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the ideas that came up with respect to the berm was that it would directly affect the residents along the first line, half dozen or so residents there, and that if we were to do a berm, we should confer with them and see what their interest was. They may say we don't want our view obstructed, or they may say, well, that's nice, that we think it's going to be noisy, let's put a berm up. So I think the berm issue should be dealt with public input from those people.
You and I go down there next week and knock on all the doors and ask them.
That's a great idea. I'm a waster for doing that, okay?
I will go.
Well, how do you want to address that then?
I mean, are we going to ask staff to do it, or are we going to?
The mechanics,
Well, it is coming back for a nighttime public meeting, so presumably we can get some input as well at that time.
Except that, John, it would be nice, I think we originally, our motion said to have the plan to council by the 27th of August. It would be nice, was 27th? It would be nice to know before that. Now, I admit that the possible problem is if half the people on first line say they want a berm and if half say they don't, at that point, I just put my hands up in the air, but, yeah, half a berm. I could find some time, I would prefer some other counselor to come with me. To go and knock on those doors. There's only, what, half a dozen houses?
Mr. Early?
I think you're best just to kind of wait and see on the berm issue. I mean, we don't even know what kind of volumes we're talking about here. You know, before you start offering berms up, you may not even have enough excess fill to do them. So let's maybe think it through and decide exactly what you're going to have, and then we can get a better idea of what you're looking at in terms of volumes.
You're right, Mark, but there was a crown on that plane. I mean, it's going to have to be leveled. There's going to be some volume of fill, right?
Yeah. So we will reserve that until we find a little bit more information. And the final one is investigate less expensive options for landscaping. So we did talk about moving, spading trees along the tree line on the park itself. Yeah.
I may have been a part of the discussion on this. I was a part of the discussion, and my drift was to try and use smaller trees rather than more expensive large ones. But I'd like to backtrack a bit on it. I think that it's worth having the park looking good now rather than 10 years, and large trees do make a difference. Not that we need to put in dozens and dozens, but having a handful of large trees would be very worthwhile. So Kim has convinced me otherwise.
And I think, if I remember correctly, I did ask Bill Litster about the opportunity along that area, and he said yes, that it has been overplanted, so trees could be moved along that north side of the... I don't think so.
Well, you got one of these deep CCAs on the fence at my farm, and if you've got the trees already there, basically it takes about an hour per tree. It ends up being
that's an option that we can look at. Because I don't know how many trees that are going to be required, but. Okay, yes.
The one comment I have had from a resident there who's been somewhat critical of various aspects of this is, don't Mickey Mouse the landscaping. Go with larger trees rather than smaller trees, and, things that are gonna look fairly mature from the get-go as opposed to having to wait. And I agree with that.
So, with going through that list, is there anything else that you want Kim to incorporate into a draft map?
This is just an indication of what I plan when the motion comes back. I will have an amendment with regard to lighting on the tennis courts, but I don't think it has any bearing on Kim's preparation of drawings and sighting and so forth. But I do have strong views on lighting on the tennis courts, at least initially.
Okay, so,
I don't think we have in that list there the idea of creating a multi-purpose flat playing field. That was a part of our original thinking, field that could be used to play soccer on, play baseball, any of these things, and that's where some of the dirt was coming from.
well, I
Well,
think,
it may be a given, but it's not there.
well, I think what Kim was doing was looking at the original plan that was provided and anything that we wanted changed. So
Fair
we
enough.
all agreed that the playing field was a go.
So you're still thinking of the playing field,
Yes,
Kim?
yes.
Yes.
Excuse me, yeah, so fully planning on leveling it.
Okay. So, is this enough direction, or do you want a formal motion?
No, I think I've made some pretty good notes here.
You have to mention the parquet, or you're coming to that.
Well, so in the next, after number 12, that is what Kim had suggested in her, and we agreed that that needs to be looked at with
So
the
the
half court.
I'm sorry, so the location has been determined for the parquet after the walkabout.
We
You
nixed,
determined the location.
we took
Nixed.
off the southeast location because of the expense doing the berm or retaining wall or
Right.
whatever you wanted. And then when we looked at the trail off Meek Avenue, it looked like it could be an option.
So that's the one I'm going to put forward to council. And that's going to include a playground and a half court. And maybe
Picnic
a little
benches.
path in between the two.
Yeah, and picnic bench or
Right.
whatever, benches. Not
Got it.
picnic benches, benches. Okay, so, Mr. Nix did draft a potential motion, but are you comfortable now that,
Well, I think it basically says everything we've just discussed, and the two big changes being the parking lot idea, that we don't use that north one, and the parquet be off the, those are the two big things that I think came from the walkabout.
okay, so would you still like to
If you
put that?
think is it
Okay,
worthwhile putting that
so
on?
I'll read the motion, that council direct the Director of Recreation prepare a modified park plan for Island Lake Family Park based on A, the draft plan presented to council on June 25th, B, comments made by council on June 25th, C, ideas that developed as a result of the site visit on July 15th, incorporating the following ideas. 1, possibility of a parkette at the north end of the trail around the Fieldstone Stormwater Management Pond. 2, the possibility of only one parking lot at Island Lake Family Park, preferably using the south entrance and preferably located as far away from any homes on First Line and Blue Heron as feasible. And 3, any other minor adjustments to the June 25th plan as the director deems advisable.
I think that incorporates everything that we've just discussed.
Except it doesn't reference the discussion that we've just had. I mean, like,
I-
this is the final definitive word as opposed to all of those.
But she made notes on it. I mean, what,
Well,
I didn't think the motion needed to get down into all the nitty-gritty, like readjusting the alignment of the tennis court. Do we have to put that in the motion?
No, I think it just should recognize the fact that we had discussion here for the very first time. The idea of a single parking lot has come up, and you do acknowledge that. But I just so that there's continuity, I think it has to reference the fact that we.
Then why didn't we change that last clause to any other ideas that the director deems appropriate to the ideas discussed at the July 30th
Based on our
council
discussion
meeting?
today. Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Okay, so how about you add it where you want it? Okay, so the last, point 3, any other suggestions made at the July 30th council meeting?
And Kim's made notes on all of that.
Okay. So that's moved by Nix and seconded by Mactolo. Any further discussion? All in favor? That carries. Okay, so on to item 3, citizen engagement charter and the survey results. So, Mr. Simpson, did you want to add anything to the memorandum that you circulated?
No, I just want to, as the memo and the survey both stress, caution has to be used on taking 95 results and extrapolating broader opinions from that. I think the comments, because they're specific, bear value. Again, caution about going from specific to general, but there's not enough data, I think, to draw strong conclusions and to use it strictly as a broad guideline for ideas.
Okay. Councillor Nix?
Without getting into the details, I'd like to compliment Fred on his math. I think that was very valuable and quite good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Any other, yes?
The one comment that we've received, and I don't know whether it was just the mayor and myself who received this email, but somebody wrote to us, and maybe the rest of council as well, to, I think incorrectly, suggest that the survey wasn't a success, that the sample size was too small. We acknowledge that it has to be viewed carefully and in some instances skeptically, especially in terms of some of the comments made in the fill-in portions. But I think it does emphasize the absolute necessity that anytime we have a survey, that we promote the heck out of it and create and have some kind of section that emphasizes ongoing surveys, maybe references results of previous surveys, something on our website that really highlights that we are out trying to get people's opinion about things. Because, you know, I think we've done that for the most part, but I think we need to be especially sensitive to it.
By comparison, I'm going on memory, when we did the survey of the Island Lake residents about the park, we got about 200 responses? How many?
204.
And there's 320, there's what, 400 or 500 homes there? So we were up to like a 1/3 sample. I mean, that really was quite well done. And I don't know how did we get such a good response on that one and not such a response on this one? Was it, did we advertise it differently or?
No, we sent everyone in that subdivision a hard copy.
Oh, that's why we got such a good response.
Now, most of them replied online, but they got a personal mailing, which
Okay.
of course we haven't done for town-wide surveys.
Yeah. The other thing I would say, and I do appreciate Fred Simpson's math on this, is that my guess is that there would be an inherent tendency in responding to a survey like this to get a larger proportion of people who were not happy with something we're doing, as opposed to the vast majority of people who are quite happy and they just wouldn't fill out the survey. So I think there's an inherent, and I admit I'm guessing, but I think there's an inherent bias to these results, even if they were statistically valid. That, right?
And I agree with that, because having my own business, being on council, and being female, I get surveys 3, 4, 5 times a week. So so from all of those different intakes, you know, you get to the point where you become numb to surveys. So you don't know, like, when's enough, or when it's too much. But I still think, like I said to Deputy Mayor Creelman, that working on the spaghetti principle, you just keep throwing it out there, and eventually something's going to stick. So I think the idea that Mr. Simpson has put before us, that we look at a 5-year action plan, I think is definitely worthwhile, and it keeps it foremost in our minds, trying to keep the engagement issue. Nobody's got it perfect. So, yes.
I'd like to, Fred, I'd like to echo the other Fred's comments. I think that you did a great job of this. We do need to have a larger sample size, there's no question about it, and you've illustrated it quite well. In fact, most of the results that we have here could be by chance, because the sample size is so small. So it's really hard to put anything on this in terms of saying more people want to use the website than want to have a newsletter, or vice versa, et cetera. The other thing is that when you have it's pretty well established that if you have a spectrum of people that are from negative to very positive, that you tend to get the people on both ends responding, and the center people you don't get. So that this is a problem of all surveys. But I think that we've got information here which may be of some value to go ahead. I think there's an interest in going ahead with a citizen engagement charter, which outlines the actual things that we're going to do, the specifics. And I think that you've left a chart there at the end of this presentation, which is empty except for the survey, and that's what needs to be filled out.
Any further comments? So we have a motion that council directs staff to prepare and incorporate into the citizen engagement charter a 5-year action plan and bring both to council for approval. Moved by Creelman and seconded by Martin. Yeah?
I make a friendly amendment to my own motion. And that such plan include recommendations with regard to giving public surveys greater prominence on our social media, including webpage.
Do you want to add that to your motion? And he put motion on the floor.
Sorry, I should have made it like that, but.
That's okay. Okay, so, and that such plan includes recommendations on how surveys be given greater prominence on our social media and website. Okay, so it's understood and you're fine with that, Sharon? Okay, so if there's no further comments, all in favor? That carries. Okay, community standards bylaw. So we have the comments that were circulated by Mr. Trotman from the committee. Did you have anything else you wanted to add, Mr. Trotman?
Only that the comments from the committee cited a number, they're premised on a number of items within the draft bylaw that got attention primarily on the matter of rural versus more urban or settlement-related applicability. Noxious weeds was one issue that came up in terms of their management, maintaining spread. Derelict vehicles, where or farm equipment, which may appear derelict or maybe in the rural area but still under use, is a less of a concern versus, say, a derelict or an abandoned or what appears to be an unused vehicle in an urban area. The issue of the human sewage item was also mentioned, as was loitering. And I mean, to that same point, there was some discussion about dust and odor in terms of its rural context versus a settlement-related context.
Councillor Nix?
Well, I had 4 comments when I read it, and maybe they're important, maybe they're not. One is that dust issue, because it's not defined in the definitions. But under Section 38, Section 38 requires owners to take reasonable precautions to control or prevent dust or other airborne matter from escaping. So my question, because we have had one incident of it, is we had a person who had a fire, and the smoke was drifting into the neighbor's place and causing some problem. Is smoke considered part of dust or airborne substance? And you don't have to answer it now, Dave, but like that's the type of issue that unless it's defined in here, when we get someone phoning us and saying, hey, my neighbor's got a fire and the smoke's coming into my house, does this bylaw cover that?
It's covered by your fire permit.
Suppose, I don't know in the case that I had to go and investigate whether the person had a fire permit or not, but even if they had a fire permit, does our property standards bylaw require the landowner to make sure the smoke is not going into the neighbor's yard or house? Okay, it's a question. You don't have to answer it today, but that's something that has come up. My second comment was, maybe it's not the word, loiter. You don't define it. So I don't know how the bylaw would ever do anything about someone loitering on a highway, because we don't define what loiter means. Does it mean if Franca and I are walking down the Hockley Road at a slow pace, we are loitering? Absolutely. All right, now we've got a definition. My third comment, under section 13.1, every owner of a property shall destroy and remove all noxious weeds. That's fine. I assume property owners includes the town of Mono. Oh, so we're allowed to have buckthorn on our property. It doesn't include Mono?
Can you use the mic?
I was part of the discussions in PAC 2 on this subject. In comparison with the previous standards, there are a few changes that are clear. So putting the two beside each other, the new one wasn't written by someone who's a resident in Mono and was really brought in from some other municipality and just brought forward for consideration. So there are certain elements of it that do not apply in Mono in general. And I say that quite boldly because one of the things that PIAC asked for was, well, was there any assessment of what are the complaints about conduct in the community that the changes are responding to? And there was no compilation of such complaints. There was this anecdote and that anecdote. But, for example, graffiti. So in the rural landscape, there's remarkably little graffiti on page wire fences. It's difficult to do. So the example came forward as, oh, well, there's graffiti on town bridges. Well, that's covered by the criminal code. So this isn't really a matter for a code of conduct unless it's for information purposes. But to draw it to everybody's attention as if it's a problem everywhere in Mono is possibly overkill. The matter, and there were a number of others along those lines. Comparing the older and the newer, one of the changes that was undertaken, which I think you may want to think about more closely, is that the former one applied to the community writ large. And when it said property owner, it included the township, individual private owners, the parks, Conservation Authority lands, etc. It was more inclusive of a community. This one, the new one, specifies very clearly that these are standards for private individuals and they do not apply on public lands. Personally, I think there's an equity issue around that because there is no code of conduct on municipal lands that has been brought forward to the community or through the council for your endorsement. So the community doesn't have an expectation of public lands other than what they see in the code of conduct as it's expressed. And if it's adopted, it's for them only. So if on the, anyway, so there's but the final thing that I'll just touch on, Fred, is this matter of geographic specificity. If the majority of complaints about neighbors' conduct are coming out of settlement areas, lands that are designated in the official plan as non-rural, for example, there may be a suite, and it is recognized in one or two of the items in what has been brought forward that they apply only to settlement areas, and they're specific about what designations they apply to. That is probably a good approach to take for reducing the number of items that apply to purely rural areas. So there's some items that apply everywhere, but there are some that really are matter for settlement areas. There are others that apply to rural areas. Now, I say this because I do feel, being in an entirely rural area, that you don't want landowners and farmers in particular, holders of large lands, to think that the code of conduct is frivolous and not well thought out. Because when they read certain things like, all private landowners must keep the grass lower than a foot or something like this, except, where it's legitimate agricultural pursuits, like a hayfield or this sort of thing. It's just, it's not something a rural landowner is going to complain to their next door neighbor about. They're going to go over and knock on the door and talk about it. So anyway, that's an opinion from the libertarian fifth line. So there you go.
I still would like to know, I went back and read the definition. Oh, sorry, Your Worship, let me ask a question. I didn't ask if I could ask a question.
I wanted to make a general statement to try and get this back on track, because I think we're getting into the weeds here.
Yes. It needs a rewrite.
Exactly. I was so looking forward to this bylaw. And when I saw it, I was angry about a number of things. Number one, it's been pulled off a shelf, been taken from another municipality, and we've been charged probably a fortune
You
by
got
our
it.
lawyer
You
to
got
do
it.
this. Number two, that's not the end of the world. It should have been gone through at the staff level and all the skip material taken out of it. There is no reason why loitering is in there. The Safe Streets Act covers that, okay?
And the Noxious Weeds Act covers
And the Noxious Weeds Act covers that, and the graffiti is covered, as you say, by the criminal code. It's called mischief. So by the time it was sent to you for your review, it should have been cleaned up more than it maybe was, if at all. The third thing is, I don't think you knew how to approach it, given all that stuff. The size of compost piles, the height of grass. Come on, it needs a rework. But I don't think we should be spending any more legal money on this.
Precisely. And
Okay.
that's what
And-
PIAC discussed and agreed to the.
And the only other comment I'd make is I do differ with the notion that you have a differentiation between, say, settlement areas and rural areas. You try to avoid that if at all possible. You minimize that to an absolute, down to zero if at all possible. But, the idea that we're going to be telling people whether they're in a settlement area or a rural area, I don't think it matters, that they can only have a compost pile that is half a meter, cubic meter or whatever it says. That's crazy. And the grass stuff is crazy. There's all kinds of stuff in that thing that is crazy. We have to start from scratch. So Fred, I wanted to do a reset on it because I think that's what I don't know, maybe we're heading in that direction. I don't know.
Can I still ask? And maybe this isn't for you, John. When I get to section 45, and I don't want to name any specific names because that's not the purpose here. I want to understand what happens when we issue an order. I went through this section 45 fairly carefully, and I still am, okay, as I understand it, our bylaw enforcement officer can issue an order. The landowner is then required to do something. If the landowner doesn't do it, we as a town can have it done and charge the cost to that person and eventually add it to their tax bill. What I don't understand from section 45 is if we issue an order, the landowner does not do it, and we as a town choose not to send someone in to fix the problem or do something so there's no cost, then what happens? What happens to that order? I mean, I can't understand from this section 45, if we issue an order and the town incurs no cost of fixing or doing something, then what's the order? It's just a piece of paper floating around in the air?
Mr. Ehrlich?
Well, your order would have to be rescinded because you're basically saying the bylaw enforcement officer's been out. He said that there's a violation of the bylaw, but you as council and judging the community standards have said, well, yes, but you've read that wrong. We disagree. Don't go do anything. Then we would rescind the order.
Hold it. You mean if the bylaw officer issues an order, and the property owner just sits there with their arm folded, and we as a town are obligated to send someone in to fix something, change something, pick up garbage, cut trees down, or whatever, we're obligated to do it. That's what you're saying?
You're not obligated to do it. What I'm saying is if you're choosing to give us direction that don't do it, that's totally different.
Council's not giving any direction. I just want to know what the power of that order is.
That's a very, very good question. One of the things that was discussed by PIAC too was that there is no bylaw enforcement officer dedicated in Mono. The enforcement of the bylaws has been weak, and that is where the public complaints have come from with regard to the former code of conduct. So upgrading the code of conduct doesn't the standards, that doesn't change the enforcement. So over weaponizing the response is, the PIAC said, not really the right approach because you're not going to exercise that weaponry. against residents. So the power of this code, of these standards, is how well they were written, how succinct and short and clear they can be, so that they persuade residents who are reading it that, this is how we should behave. Like, we really need to persuade rather than weaponize the bylaws, because are we really going to exercise that weaponry? I don't think
If
so.
I understand you then, John, you're saying that section 45 is not needed. We don't need to issue orders.
Well, I wouldn't go that, I wouldn't, that's beyond my purview, but I'm just saying, the way it is currently written is such that you would need to weaponize it for sure, because people will be so offended by it, frankly. But if you turn the attention to getting it right so that when people read it, they say, I know what the expectations are of living in Mono. Whereas you can't get that from the way it's currently written.
Mr. Early?
Just for clarification and to take a couple of steps back, the reason this bylaw was put together was because of the problems with enforcing the garbage bylaw and enforcing the property standards bylaw. You're well aware what happens with the property standards bylaw process. The garbage bylaw, again, it's sending our lawyer to court to get a charge. So that was the purpose, one of the purposes of this bylaw. And secondly, just for clarification, this bylaw was actually started by staff, referred to the town solicitor as well at the end of the day to make sure that the enforcement provisions were decent. It is a bylaw that was originally generated through the town of Halton Hills, which, for those of you who are aware, is very much an urban and rural split municipality. They function well with it. So that's the bylaw that was chosen. We didn't just take a City of Toronto bylaw and kind of work with that. So I hear your comments, but that's how we got to where we are, and that's where the bylaw was originally based. So what do we do now?
Okay.
I just want to comment on this.
Okay.
Just on the issue of process, what I don't understand here is there's obviously an attempt to avoid the court process here. However, at the same time, any person who contravenes an order is guilty of an offense. Well, if you're guilty of an offense, then you're heading into a summons to court and a charge before the court and a decision of the court as to whether one is guilty or innocent of the contravention alleged. The alternative to that is what's known as administrative penalties, which keeps it out of the court system. And we are exploring that for Dufferin County. And it would essentially be an order and a failure to comply with that order would result in an administrative penalty, and there is an appeal mechanism to that. But I'm not so certain that safeguards exist in this process for the person to have their day either in court or in front of a hearing officer under administrative penalties scheme. It simply seems to be that you have an order, you ignore it, and then the town has a remedy of going in and making it right, as it were. But where's the natural justice in that? There's got to be something there that balances it out without getting into an expensive, drawn-out court procedure. And we all know how that works, and I know really how that works. But the reality is, and I think Town of Caledon should be looked at as an example. In their property standards scheme, there are a number of automatic warnings given before a charge is laid. A charge can be laid, a summons issued, you're brought into court. The court usually gives 4 to 6 months to come into compliance before setting it down for trial. But at least it's then before the court system with a couple of appearances, and everybody's focused on solving the problem, and most things do not go to trial because the process is serious and it has people's attention.
Let's take one more question, because we're going to have to go into the public meeting, so we can hold this item over, but if you want to, have you commented?
Just following up on John's suggestion, Mark, could you clarify what our present process is?
Our present process is, we work on a complaint basis, first of all, so we don't go out proactively through the municipality. It's complaint-based. Most of the bylaw enforcement issues are actually dealt with by the bylaw enforcement officer, by working it's usually with neighbors, it's usually one on the other, and resolving issues. A few times we have gone to court, we've, just on garbage bylaws usually. The threats leading up to it usually get a property cleaned up. In the couple of instances I'm aware of, we have gone to go to court and get an injunction. And that's suggested, even though the bylaws say you can go in and do the work and put it on the tax bills, we have gone and actually followed through the injunction.
Mark,
Because you
if
do
I-
run the risk of the lawsuit after the fact, so having the court on side with you before you go is.
Mark, if I
very-
can,
Yeah,
the
sorry,
use
John.
of the word injunction implies Superior Court. Is that the direction you've
That
gone?
was what we did do in one instance, yes.
Well, I would say, and I don't want to get into a debate with our counsel without him being present, but that's a very heavy hammer by comparison to a charge before a provincial offences court.
Right, and that was because we had gone that route on multiple occasions, and that was actually the reasons that we actually got the injunction, was because of the failed attempts before to have the property cleaned up. And in that particular case, we actually got all of our legal costs back.
The issues come up with respect to rural and settlement, and John brought that up as a possible, we should have a split, and I know you recognize that that's a problem, and I do too, but there's a significant difference between what's expected if you're living down on Blue Heron Drive and, say, my 100-acre farm, in terms of brush piles, weeds, et cetera, meadows, and all these things. So somehow or other, we have to come to grips with what's reasonable and what is dealing with the perceived problems. Thank you.
So, we have come to the 10 o'clock for the public meeting, so I have a motion that we adjourn the regular meeting of council and go into a public meeting to discuss zoning bylaw amendment 2017-03. Have a mover? Moved by Martin and seconded by Nix. All in favor? Carries. Okay, so, Mr. Trotman, could you start us off, please?
Thank you, Mayor Ryan. This is an application that was brought forward last year for the property known as 507-393 Highway 89. It's at the third line intersection, the portion north of 89 that is it's actually maintained by Mulmer, owned by the town, municipally Mono. It is for an amendment to the existing local commercial C7 zoning, CL7 zoning, to permit a small repair type shop. It did go to previous council for a public meeting. So part of the decision here was, given change in council and committees, to have the new committees and council have a fresh look at this, and also try to deal with some of the issues that have arisen at those meetings previous. I think at this point, really, it's just better that we let the applicant and his consultant make their presentation and focus on what their proposed changes are to their proposed bylaw amendment, and maybe weigh in on some of the site elements that have been changed as well in the concept plan that's attached to my report and their presentation. So I guess with that, I think Mr. Jamie Robinson from MHBC Plan Consultants is going to make his presentation.
Yeah, I don't present it. I'm not sure if it got brought, but I have a copy.
Okay, I was gonna say, I never received it. One more. is it, you're looking at a PDF or a PowerPoint?
There's a folder that says Normal Township, but that's
PowerPoint, okay. So I'm gonna drag it here so we're not trying to run it off the USB. We've got the controller right there. And can't remember if I'm.
I would just note while Mr. Robinson's getting set up there, we did get a letter from Steve Mountford in Mulmer. It came in late last week. He's reiterating comments I think he made at a previous meeting about the use and the nature of the business proposed. So I think it will be captured by part of Mr. Robinson's presentation.
It's on council says, thanks, David. On council says you've got correspondence from the Sheffields, Mountfords, Gill, and Millers. So those are all on your desk that were submitted after publishing the agenda.
set?
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, worship, members of council, the public, and staff for having me today. My name's Jamie Robinson. I'm a partner with MHBC Planning in Barrie, and I'm the representative for Michael Bellissimo. I've got a presentation here that I'd just like to go over to provide you with a bit of the history and the background related to the application, and some of the very specifics related to the proposal, as well as the planning, most applicable planning policies that apply to this application. So this application, there was a previous public meeting last year, and I've got a slide in a moment that deals with the history. But just in terms of the location of the proposal, it's at Highway 89 in the third line, and it's located on the northeast corner of that area. It's a vacant site currently. There's a number of residential uses in the area. There's also a retail use to the west, and as well as Miss Mitchell's restaurant is at the end of the road allowance for the third line. Just in terms of background information, there was a number of studies that have been completed, and I'm going to go over those in a moment. So as far as application submissions, this application dates back till last year. It did come before Planning and Development Committee back in May of 2018. There was a statutory public meeting before the previous council in May of 2018. And at that time, there wasn't any planning justification that had been submitted with the application. So following that public meeting that was held, the applicant contacted ourselves, and what we conducted was a land use planning review of the proposal to determine if we felt that there was land use planning merits associated with the proposed application. So that was before being retained by the applicant. So we undertook that review, and based on our review, we did identify that there would be land use planning merits for the application, that we believed it did conform to the applicable policies and was consistent with the provincial policy statement. We did recommend some modifications be completed to the conceptual site plan application. Just to be clear, what's before council today as part of the public meeting is a zoning bylaw amendment application. We have completed a site plan, a conceptual site plan, to demonstrate that the proposed use could function on the site. If a zoning bylaw amendment is approved, there would be subject to site plan control as well, that there would have to be a complete site plan application submission package completed and site plan approval granted. So just in terms of timing, in December, we submitted a planning justification report and a revised site plan. We did host a community information meeting on February 5th. That was at the Curling Club in Shelburne. So that wasn't a town meeting, that was conducted by us and by the proponent, where we sent notices out to all the nearby property owners to advise them of the proposal and try to receive their comments in advance. And then in June of this year, there was a meeting at your Planning, Environment, and Natural Heritage Committee meeting. So just in terms of the proposal, the site is currently zone C7, which it's a local commercial zone. A number of the uses that are permitted are uses that I would typically equate with sort of a highway commercial zone. There's a whole host of permitted uses identified. The use that was before planning committee was identified as the repair and sales of light and heavy-duty trucks, heavy equipment, and farm equipment. At that meeting, it was clear that there needed to be a more defined definition of what was being proposed for the site. There was a number of concerns with respect to the potential scale of the use and the size of vehicles that could be sold and potentially serviced on the site. So since that meeting back in June, we've had an opportunity to consider further scoping the use and limiting the size and the scale of the operation. So what we've provided staff with is a revised definition and a revised permitted use, and we've called it a small-scale vehicle repair shop. And with that, we've included some limitations on the size of vehicles and the scale of the proposed use. So it falls within that realm of what a small-scale vehicle repair shop would be. So what this slide identifies is it proposes a specific definition for, and this would be a site-specific definition for what a small-scale vehicle repair shop would be. And I'd like to go over that with you and provide you with the rationale and the details for why we've proposed this definition. So what we've identified is that it would be a use where small to medium-sized vehicles are serviced and sold. So it would allow for the servicing and sale of these vehicles. The client has identified that the level of servicing that would be undertaken on the site is quite minimal. But from a land use planning perspective, I don't really have a mechanism in which I can restrict the type of services that specifically occur. But we've proposed to do that through the size of vehicles and the size of the building. The building that's identified in the conceptual site plan application is 2,000 square feet in size. So it's not an overly large building. It's got 2 bays associated with it. What we've identified in terms of limiting the scale is the service and sale of vehicles shall include farm tractors with a maximum of 4 wheels. And then I guess I'll carry on it. Farm implements, landscaping equipment, automobiles, trucks with a maximum of 2 axles, and trailers with a maximum of 1 axle. From a land use planning perspective, it's somewhat difficult to limit the size of vehicles. And the one mechanism I could think of to limit the size of farm equipment or tractors would be to limit the number of wheels that are permitted. One of the concerns was that if large farm tractors are going to be serviced on the site, there could be impacts with respect to the parking that from Mrs. Mitchell's restaurant that occurs along the 3rd line and the ability to access the site with large farm tractors. So sticking it to restraining tractor sizes to 2 wheels, that would restrict a dually tractor, for example, or those larger tractors that might take up additional road width. We also heard concerns that combines might be serviced there and how wide they are, and this would not allow for those large combines or large implements to be serviced on the site or to be sold on the site. From a truck and an automobile perspective and a trailer perspective, we thought limiting the number of axles would be a way to restrict the truck size. There was a concern that transport trucks might be able to be serviced or sold on the site, or that large triaxle dump trucks, and we thought by limiting the number of axles to 2 axles, that would limit you to the small size dump trucks or small size trucks by limiting the axles. So we've reduced the scale and of what's proposed to be sold and serviced on the site through the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. And that's a direct response to the comments that were provided. And I think it's a good change because it more specifically defines the size of vehicles that could be serviced on the site. There is also a concern with the number of vehicles that might be able to be sold on the site. So we have proposed to limit the number of vehicles that can be sold on the site to 11. And that again speaks to restricting the size and scale of the use on the site. There was also some comments with respect to what would the building look like and what type of architectural features would it have. As you're likely aware, we don't have an ability to control that through Section 34 of the Planning Act, which is the zoning bylaw section. We don't have the architectural control provisions in place. But what we're proposing is that there be a note included on the bylaw that through the site plan process that the building elevations that are be considered contain some elements of local agricultural community or local agricultural buildings in the area. So it's not really an enforceable provision, I would say, to a zoning bylaw amendment, but it's a note, then it's a guide that as a site plan application would be considered, that there needs to be a consideration of scale. I had a chance to look at the size of other buildings in the area, be it residential buildings or non-residential buildings or accessory buildings, and a 2,000 square foot building, in my opinion, is not out of character with the size of other buildings that exist in the area. Just in terms of supporting studies that have been completed, the full suite of supporting studies were provided in support of the application. There was a noise study completed to identify what potential noises might emanate from the site, and the neighboring land uses were considered. As a result, you'll see in the site plan that the doors of the building have been rotated to the east so that any noise from the entrances would be projected to the east as proposed to the west or the north where the surrounding land uses are, surrounding more sensitive land uses are. You'll see from the site plan as well, there's proposed areas of vegetation and screening, some fencing, board fencing proposed to limit noises or other site activities from impacting Ms. Mitchell's restaurant. This figure shows the proposed site plan, and as I mentioned, we've identified some potential areas of vegetation and planting. We've identified some areas, there's an area of purple identified in the northwest, that's the top upper left-hand corner, which that's an area where a proposed board fence is identified. As you can see from there's arrows that identify the proposed doors of the site towards the east. And what this demonstrates is that the proposed use could be appropriately sited on the property. Again, a detailed site plan application would have to be submitted with any application. There were some concerns or comments from one of the members of the Planning and Development Committee about the setback from the pavement and the setback from the third line of the proposed use. Just in terms of from the asphalt surface of the third line, the setback to where the retaining wall's proposed, see if this will work, yeah, so setback from the asphalt to this retaining wall is about 8 meters, and there's proposed from the lot line in this location to this proposed retaining wall that would delineate the parking area would be a minimum of 1.5 meters. Again, this is a preliminary site plan, and there could be modifications completed to it. Just from a land use planning context now, because I think that's probably what you're interested in, these are the policies that establish the basis for whether the use is appropriate for the site or not. And these are the policies that we spent time on when we were first provided with the proposal to consider whether or not we should even take on this file. The subject lands are designated mono in the town official plan. And the mono town official plan in the rural designation identifies a number of objectives, and those objectives are detailed at the bottom of the slide, and they relate to supporting a diversified rural economy, protecting agricultural lands and resource uses, maintaining viability of rural areas, supporting agribusiness operations, and protecting natural heritage features and functions. We have reviewed the proposed development in light of those objectives, and we believe the proposed development would conform to those objectives, and the details are provided in the planning report. From a specific permitted use perspective, what the mono official plan identifies in the rural area, it identifies a series of permitted uses, and this is really establishing the principle of use for this area, and these uses are identified at the top of this slide. What's being proposed here would fall within the category of a small-scale commercial use. Now, there's criteria that exist in the official plan. These are in the form of policies, but they're effectively criteria that need to be met in order for a small-scale use to be approved or by council and supported by a planner. These criteria are extremely important, and so I'm going to spend a little bit of time related to these. Specifically, the criteria and the policies are outlined in section 15.3E, and they state that, so this relates to small-scale commercial uses, are limited to those related to resource management, recreational, rural uses that cannot be located in a settlement area. So that last item, rural uses that cannot be located in a settlement area, that's an important consideration in this instance. Yes, a sales and service use could be located in a settlement area. There's no doubt about that. What's unique about this situation is that this site, although it's designated rural in the official plan, it's zoned commercial. It's zoned that CL, it's zoned C7 in the zoning bylaw that does already allow for commercial uses on the site. And it allows for a whole series of commercial uses on the site. Some of those commercial uses are also automobile-related uses, which is similar in nature to what's being proposed here. So we believe that based on the scale of the use, that this is an appropriate location, even though it could conceivably be located in a settlement area. It's not an uncommon use that you would see in other rural areas throughout the province. With respect to the second item, permitted in areas not suitable for agriculture, clearly this isn't an agricultural area. This is an area where rural residential uses and some other rural commercial uses exist. And I guess back to that other item, cannot be located in a settlement area. We do have examples in the area. For example, there's a restaurant and there's a retail use in proximity to the site. These are also uses that, although they're existing, they could be located in a settlement area, but they're also appropriate in a rural area based on the circumstances. So we have no issues with those uses there, but just as an example for council, that there's uses that could occur in both situations. The third item relates to the lot sizes being adequate for parking, setbacks, and services. The site plan is intended to demonstrate that a suitable parking area exists, suitable setbacks can be achieved, and that there's an appropriate area for a septic system on the site. Just as a point of note, no proposed amendments are requested to the standards of the zoning bylaw. So no reduced yard setbacks, no building height reductions or increases or anything to that nature. It's simply the use that's being considered. Can the proposal be serviced? Yes, it can be serviced. There's been supporting studies completed to demonstrate that. Compliance with zoning for the use, signage, and open storage. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment would identify that the use is appropriate for the site. From a signage perspective, any sign bylaw would have to be adhered to. And open storage would have to be completed in accordance with the site plan agreement. The current zone does allow for some outdoor storage. Subject to site plan control, fully recognize that, and applicable MDS. There is no minimum distance separation that's applicable in this instance. So as I mentioned from the zoning perspective, this is CL-7, and as I indicated, there's no change proposed to the proposed zone standards. What I did want to bring up was some of the other automobile-related uses that are permitted as of right on the site. So a service center, service station is permitted as of right, which allows for the sale of fuels and lubricants, and also some maintenance to snowmobiles and motor vehicles, the maintenance or repair of those through the definition. So the current zoning permissions on the site do allow for some automobile-related uses. And again, I've demonstrated to you how the proposed amendment intends to maintain the small-scale nature of the proposal. This is the list of permitted uses that are permitted on the site as of right in the zoning bylaw. And from a planning perspective, I've had a chance to review these uses, and I'm not going to go into detail with respect to them all, but a number of these uses are, in my opinion, have the potential to be a much more intensive use of the site to generate a considerable more traffic than what the proposed use would generate. We suggest by limiting the number of sale of vehicles to 11, that the amount of traffic that this site would see would be extremely limited on a daily basis. There have been a number of comments received by the public as a result of this proposal. That's one of the reasons that we hosted the meeting back in February, and we've tried to characterize these concerns. Visual impact. We've taken steps to minimize the visual impact of the proposed development through landscaping and through the site plan. The setback, there's been no proposed reductions to setbacks, so there is an opportunity through the setbacks provided in the zoning bylaw to provide landscaping and provide screening. We don't, again, have an ability through this zoning bylaw process to provide specific details about the architectural nature of the building, but we have provided that note to try to direct the site plan and direct the elevations in that manner. Noises. There's been concerns with respect to noises, and there's policies in your official plan related to sensitive uses and sensitive receptors. There's policies in the county official plan related to sensitive land uses and sensitive receptors. Sensitive receptors are considered on the basis of the provincial policy statement policies and based on what's considered to be an adverse effect under the Environmental Protection Act. And a noise study has been completed, and predicted noises that would emanate from the site fall within the MOECP guidelines with respect to noise emissions. So with respect to impact on sensitive receptors in the nearby area, any noise that is predicted to emanate from the site would meet MOECP standards. I can advise you that in terms of hours of operation, and this isn't a proposed use that's intended to operate into the night, it's intended to be a daytime operation. But we don't have the ability to restrict hours of operation through a zoning bylaw amendment. From an environmental issues, there was concerns raised with respect to the environment. There was an environmental site assessment completed for the site. There was a consideration of soil conditions and of the removal of the storage tanks completed on the site. And again, all environmental considerations were completed in accordance with MOECP requirements. Sort of item number 4 really speaks to item number 3 as well. And the cleanup that was undertaken for the site was undertaken in accordance with regulations. There's been a number of concerns raised with respect to safety and access of the site. The original proposal was for an access directly from Highway 89. MTO had identified that they would not issue a permit for access from Highway 89, and the access had to be from the third line. So what was proposed on the site plan was an access as far north as possible from Highway 89. That does put the access in the area of Miss Mitchell's restaurant, but we have proposed the buffering and the screening with the fences adjacent to that use to try and reduce any impact on that site. MTO did review the application, and there was a traffic letter provided by an engineer on behalf of the proponent, but MTO did not require a specific traffic study, and that's outlined in the correspondence that was provided to them. It specifically states a traffic impact study will not be required for the proposed use, bracket auto sales and service. As far as land use compatibility, this really speaks to the sensitive land use matter that I've alluded to previously. The site is zoned for commercial uses. There are commercial uses in proximity to the site. There are residential uses in proximity to the site. But based on the studies that have been completed that deal with the sensitivity of noise, we believe that the proposed use is compatible from that perspective. And your official plan and the county official plan has compatibility policies, land use compatibility policies within those documents, and again, it really speaks towards the sensitivity and which again relates to the adverse effects that are governed by the MOECP guidelines. With respect to the historic nature of the area, there was comments that this is a historic area that has some historic uses associated with it, and that the proposed use will detract from that historic nature of this area and this community. Again, I'll speak towards the building size. I believe the building's not out of character with respect to size being 200 square feet in size. There's other buildings of similar size. We don't have the ability, again, through the zoning bylaw amendment to identify architectural controls, but through the site plan process and through that note in the bylaw, we can work towards achieving sort of an agricultural building look to the proposal. Some enhanced plantings and landscaping has been proposed to help assist to maintain that the character of the existing area. And again, the development would be subject to site plan control. I wanted to touch on the county comments because those are comments that came in basically right at the previous meeting. We did not have a chance to address those comments. I've contacted the county to review their comments with them. We have not had an opportunity to have a meeting with them with respect to that, so that's a matter that's outstanding. But their principal comment related to the conformity of the proposed development with the county official plan, and specifically as an agriculturally related or rural land use. In our previous information, we've identified that the proposed use is proposed to service the agricultural community, but would also be a rural land use. It's proposed to be a rural commercial use. There would be a limited amount of service and sales that could support the surrounding agricultural community, but it would also support the surrounding rural area. So we believe the proposed use would support that agricultural community, and it would be compatible with and would not hinder surrounding agricultural operations. Those are the tests that are provided, or the criteria that are provided in the official plan related to agriculturally related uses. Specifically, and this is the key one, relates to the rural use of land, is that the site is designated for rural uses but zoned commercial. I've already indicated to you that a service and sales use could occur in a settlement area, but it is also common in rural areas. And specifically, the official plan doesn't define what a rural use is. There's no definition of rural use. But what it does identify is a number of criteria that exist, and that's provided in section 433L that establishes, in order to be considered a rural commercial use, you effectively need to meet these criteria. So almost any use could be considered a rural use if it's in the right location and depending on the scale and the nature of the proposed, of what's being proposed. So I'd just like to spend a moment, and I'm almost complete here, but to look at section 4.3.3L of the county official plan, which I believe that's really the operative policy that the county planners are focusing on in this instance in terms of conformity with that document. And what that policy states is section 4.3 are policies that apply to rural lands, and this is considered rural lands. And it states, L states, where rural industrial or rural commercial uses are proposed, the following must be met. And then it provides some criteria. So this is a rural commercial use that's being proposed. It states, the proposed use will not create or add negative impact on the environment, adjacent or nearby sensitive land uses, or traffic patterns. So just dealing with the environment, the studies have been provided that provide the details related to the environment. There's no impact on the environment. With respect to sensitive land uses, I've already provided you with the information that we've completed the noise studies, and any noise emanating from the site would not impact neighboring land uses. It would be within MOECP guidelines, and that's the test associated in the PPS related to adverse impact. And then finally, traffic patterns. The traffic's anticipated to be very limited, again with 11 vehicles, the maximum 11 vehicles for sale. That's a limited number of vehicles. And the MTO has identified that no traffic impact study would be required based on the small-scale nature of the proposed use. So with respect to that criteria, it's my opinion that each of those items is met from a land use planning perspective. Second, the proponent will demonstrate how outdoor storage, if any, and the storage and removal of on-site generated waste is to be accommodated. There's no specific outdoor storage proposed except for the sale of vehicles that might exist on the site. And this site, the zoning specifically does allow for outdoor storage as of right as well. It's accessory to any use. So I believe that that section of the county official plan is met. The third item says the proponent will demonstrate how traffic generated from the proposed use will impact existing roads and how much will be generated. Again, the engineer for the proposed development has identified that traffic would be limited, and MTO has identified that no specific traffic study is necessary. So we believe that criteria is met. The fourth item identifies for use that have the ability to compromise or contaminate the subject lands, the proponent will submit a remediation plan to be used upon discontinuation of the use to the satisfaction of the municipality, county, and applicable ministries. We do not believe that there's any potential for contaminant to the site as a result of the proposed use. There's been no request from the county made to complete a contaminant study as a result of pre-consultation or from the township. If there's any exchanging of fuels that occurs on the site, it would have to be completed in accordance with MOE guidelines and MOE certificates that are issued to repair garages for those sorts of uses. So we don't believe there's any concerns with respect to that. The fifth and final criteria, the proponent will submit a study that not only justifies the proposed use of land, but also demonstrates how the foregoing, so the previous four criteria, and any other requirements set out in this plan and the local municipal official plan will be met. We did complete a planning justification report, which has been provided, and that planning justification report does review these policies that I have reviewed for you today. So that completes my presentation. I apologize for the length of it, but I think it was important that you understand, because there has been so many comments received on this application. We do recognize that it's a contentious issue among some of the neighboring landowners, but we did think it was important to demonstrate to you, the decision makers, how the proposed policies have been met from a land use planning perspective and the steps that have been taken to limit the scale of the proposed development and address the comments that have been provided by the residents. So I thank you again for the opportunity to speak and for the time. And
would you entertain any questions from council?
I can do my best, absolutely.
Well, I probably have several, but let me just deal with one, and I fully admit in asking this, it's over my head. My understanding is that another consulting company, WSP, who was working for the county, says that your plan does not specifically or adequately, I forget the word they use, address section 4.3 of the Dufferin County official plan. Now, I know in your slide there, you address that point. I have to admit, between you and this other consulting company, I have no idea if it addresses section 4.3 or not. I ask you the question, but I would also maybe ask our...
I think I can provide some clarity on that, to your worship. So, to your worship, Councillor Nix, yes, those were the comments, and as I alluded to at the start of my presentation, I have had a discussion with WSP, and we would like to have a further discussion with WSP and the county planners. That has not occurred in advance of this meeting, so we'd like to have the opportunity to do that. I've provided to you today my rationale for why it meets those policies, so we are going to request that you do not make a decision today, that we have an opportunity to circle back with the county planners and get us a clear recommendation one way or the other from them on whether or not it meets, so that you as council and planning staff's able to make a recommendation one way or the other to you as council how those policies are not addressed. I don't want you to have to take my word for it today by any sense, but we will be recommending that there be no decision made today, and I should have brought that to your attention. Thanks.
Mr. Mayor?
Number of questions. If tractors were not part of this business plan, would you be in conformity with the county official plan?
Yeah, through your worship, yes, we believe we would be as a rural land use, as an other rural land use. That's the PPS term that's used, and the county plan permits rural uses. So yes, we would be in conformity with the various.
Well, I'm just
stuff.
looking at your slide there, and it references agricultural related or rural land use. It's one or the other, but it strikes me that the addition of tractors to the business plan strengthens your case, but it also could be perceived as being done to be in conformity with the county plan.
Your worship, we believe we're in conformity with the plan as a rural land use. We also recognize that there could be an agricultural component of it. We want to be able to service tractors and sell those that type of equipment as well. So I think we fall under both, but we are more clearly a rural land use.
My second question is, and this is maybe for our planner, and it's really a chicken and egg question. What came first, the gas station in 1978 or the commercial zoning CL7?
Well, I may defer to my CL on that one, but I believe it was CL first, and then the provision for special 7, which relates to the station, came later. That's my understanding. I mean, this goes back quite a while.
I'm just wondering if the commercial designation was done.
There's no commercial zoning. It's rural designated.
Okay, but the current zoning that allows for this use.
The gas station?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, but
That
was
was-
there a
that
gas
was-
station there prior to the introduction of zoning per se?
I believe, well, I'm looking at Mr. Early as I speak to you. I believe that the 7 special provision was added to the existing CL zone to add gas station use, which commenced somewhere in the mid-late 70s up until, I'm not sure when it was actually, the use ceased and then the actual gas station building removed. I believe it was a good number of years before 2015, but maybe Mr. Early can shed some light on that.
Yeah, I think David's not far off. I think there's always been a repair facility there, and that the gas station was added with the CL7. It may have been the other way around. The gas station was there and the repair facility was added. The repair facility was there. The gas station was there and then the repair facility came in. So that's hence we tightened up the zoning at that time to go to the CL-7 as opposed to just an open CL. Just for clarification, in case the question comes up, this is a local commercial zone within the rural area. Normally, this would have been in either a hamlet or a suburban area. If you recall, town council went through the hamlet areas and removed a lot of the growth potential for hamlets and started calling them historic hamlets. So that's how we end up with this difference between not having a highway commercial zone on here, but a local commercial, because Violet Hill was at one point a developable hamlet, and that potential was removed for residential purposes.
What I'm trying to get at is whether the zoning was changed to recognize existing reality.
At the time.
Yeah.
The zone has always been commercial. There was a commercial use there prior to 1978.
As long as I can remember. And I guess my final observation is MTO. Once again, they come to the rescue. No traffic impact study required at this time. My recollection is that there used to be access off Highway 89 into that gas station, and all of a sudden we have the temerity to say, no, we're not going to give you access, even though historically it had been there. And we don't really, we don't really care. I mean, that's just my political observation here. We don't really care. And I wonder if they're going to take that same position, I know they won't, when we deal with the proposed gravel extraction operations to the south, even though those are proposed to enter onto the third line. Maybe they won't care about the impact on their highway at that point, but they will, of course. So there's no consistency whatsoever here.
I would like to see the noise study. Is it available?
Yep, certainly the noise study's available. It's available at the planning department for review.
I have a copy.
So I consider that to be a part of the analysis that's important. And there's also a question of whether or not it should be peer-reviewed. Would David have a comment on that?
I did mention that and note that in my evaluation summary. I did also reference some of the salient language summarized in that impact study on page 2 of my report. You know, the question, do they need to be peer reviewed? I mean, it's a sensitive application, and I think that weighs partly into my thought process there in terms of peer reviewing those two reports. I'm not sure that the report dealing with the underground storage tank removal is necessary. They were removed under TSSA regulations, so I think that's a non-matter at this point. The noise report is premised on available information. There's not a building and use there, obviously, so it's based on modeling. I guess with some abundance of caution, I'm thinking maybe that could be done. It could be that the peer review says, yep, what you see is what we also have come up with, but it may not hurt to provide clarity.
I suspect the noise report is based on, I use this term loosely, but conjecture and supposing.
Model, yeah, it was based on modeling.
We have bays that are open or bays that are closed and they're facing east, and now I think they were facing west before. I would like to see the noise report.
Yeah, I can provide it to you.
Yes.
We just spent some time on our property standards, and one of the things was dust control. And I can see coming off 89 onto the third line that there would be a traffic with trucks, tractors, whatever. It's going to produce a considerable amount of dust.
To your point, Councillor Miranda, Ken said I did have an inquiry into our engineers about surface treatment on that portion of third line relative to the proposed use. I just have not heard back yet.
So if there's no further comments or questions, yes?
Just to point out, our planning committee has unanimously recommended that we reject this. Our planning director has basically asked for further time to receive input, county portion and so forth. So we have a little bit of a contradiction in terms of our own committee's assessment of this versus what is being advised. So I just bring that to council's attention. I don't know whether we need to deal with that today or not.
Yes.
Your worship, I think what's likely appropriate in this instance would be, because there's been some more information provided since the planning committee meeting was held in terms of reducing the scale of the operation and some specifics related to the nature of the use, that it might be appropriate to go back to planning committee, and particularly once we have the comments from the county, to see if planning committee maintains the same recommendation or if it is modified at all. But I'll leave that in your hands. I'm not sure the practice in this municipality, or whether we just come back with the same information, or come back with additional information to council. But I think you've got planning committee's resolution that deals with a slightly different proposal than what's there now. I think it's been scaled back from what they were dealing with. So, thank you.
Duly noted. Okay, so now I'd like to open it up for public comments. There is a microphone there. Anyone who wanted to come forward and state any concerns for the record?
Hi, my name's Kim Lyon, and I live on Mono-Mulmer Town Line, right beside Mrs. Mitchell's restaurant. So I will be heavily impacted by anything that happens at the property on that corner there. I believe you have an email from me outlining my concerns. I have spoken to the planning committee prior about my concerns, and basically I don't think anything on any scale, the fact that they've tried to scale it down now, I'm not sure, but is going to be good for the area. I mean, there's people walking up and down that road constantly. My grandchildren are out there playing. You know, this is where I plan to retire. The noise level is going to be just increased astronomically. Just concerns because the Mono-Mulmer Town Line area is not paved, so, you know, the dust is always a concern in that area. Anyway, I don't think I can say much more than what I've already reiterated in my emails, and thank you for taking me into consideration.
Thanks for coming.
So my name is Heidi Bofelt. I've been a resident in Violet Hill for 45 years. We have Mrs. Mitchell's Restaurant and Granny taught us how. My concerns are still the same, although they have said, and I think he's done a great job trying to convince you with the downsizing and whatnot. Although it hasn't been designated heritage, there are buildings of historic significance in there. It doesn't rhyme, unfortunately. It's a beautiful little hamlet with a schoolhouse, Orangeman's Lodge, a church. And although it is zoned, even for what it's zoned now, a lot of those things would not apply just because of the MTO not allowing access from Highway 89. So even though it is zoned those, a gas station would never go in there. There are so many things that couldn't work there. I think that it's unfortunate that the property was purchased just because it doesn't work accessing from Mono-Mulmer Town Line there. That is the entry point to a hamlet. And although the vehicles may be smaller, it's still, that's what they're going to see. So that will change forever what Violet Hill is. And we have lots of tourism coming in there because of that. We have bus tours. My also concern is with the noise, although it may be within the regulations. We do weddings outside, we do garden parties, all kinds of things during the week, especially at lunch. And although it may not be as noisy as it's allowed, or a lot noisier than it's allowed to be, it's going to be noise. So that's a concern. I also, with the 11 vehicles and less axles, is that an agreement made with the business owner for this, or will the rezoning, will it be within the rezoning, or if they sell, will it open it up? Do you understand what I'm trying to say? Is this just an agreement with this business owner and you, or will that be part of the rezoning? Only 11 vehicles moving forward if he sells. It just doesn't make sense to me, and I thank you. This is 40 years of my family in this hamlet trying to state my case. Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from gallery? Okay. So with that, Mr. Trotman, in order to properly process this application, you're requesting that we defer any decision to allow what other information needs to come forward, and whether or not you feel that it needs to go back to NH committee, or does it need to come directly back to council again?
Well, I think in fairness, I mean, to the various matters, there's obviously existing residents and business owners who have concerns and have expressed them what they are. But in fairness, I think to the applicant, given the WSP comments that came in a little later, they should have an opportunity to address them. And Mr. Robinson has indicated he wishes to do that with WSP. I think it really boils down to whether it goes back to plan committee or not, or comes back directly after that dialogue, and any other substantive changes being proposed by the applicant and his consultant to council. I'm not sure I have a pat answer for you. I mean, in abundance of caution, it would be go back to committee and see if committee would then change their recommendation. Not necessarily they would, but it behooves both sides, I guess, to have that. I mean, it's gotten this far and it's been reviewed this much. I suspect that's probably a prudent thing to do.
Okay. So in terms of process, do we close our public meeting and then make a resolution in council meeting, or do we do it within this public meeting?
Sending it back to the committee, have we decided whether or not that committee, in addition to hearing the comments from Dufferin County in that discussion, does the noise study need to be peer reviewed before, or is Ralph looking at it, is that adequate for us as council to make a decision on that? Well then, before it goes back to the committee, do we need to have the noise study peer reviewed?
We have a deposit system with these types of applications, so we could make that call staff-wise. It would probably be a good thing to do at this point.
Okay, so is there any further comments or questions? Yes. Mr. Riley.
Given the issue along Highway 9 in Mono with regard to vehicle sales, commercial vehicle sales, in addition to noise, the primary issue, I understand it, is overnight light security and the use of overnight lights. And so I might suggest staff consideration, or your consideration, of some commitments or undertaking about overnight lighting used in a small community in order to achieve the necessary security on parked vehicles.
John, wouldn't that be part of the site plan control? If we change the zoning, wouldn't that be the place to deal with it?
Perhaps. I just note over the last few years of discussion of this particular matter, lighting has never come forward on Highway 89, but it's been a big issue on Highway 9. So,
Okay. Thank you for that.
and it could well be under site plan control if that's the right way to do it.
Well, to Mr. Riley's point, I mean, where we have dealt with commercial properties in the past, we've always had applicants weigh in and show conformity to the dark sky policy.
Okay then.
And if I can chime in, as I usually do on this topic, this calls for an even darker sky than normal, if it goes ahead.
Okay. Okay, so if there's nothing further, we have a motion that we close the public meeting and resume the regular meeting of council. Could I have a mover? Moved by Martin and seconded by Mantalo. All in favor? Carries.
Since we sort of skipped over,
Well, I think it would be prudent for us to deal with the results of the public meeting and what our actions want to be. The proposed motion that was provided by our Director of Planning, it says, receives planning report. The council received planning report dated July 25th, 2019, and defers rendering a decision on file ZBA 2017-03 related to 507393 Highway 89 until after the applicant and/or his planning consultant satisfactorily addresses comments from WSP on behalf of the county, Dufferin County, as well as other matters identified in the July 25th, 2019 planning report and at the July 30th, 2019 public meeting.
And on this basis, refer it back to committee prior to.
And on this basis, refer it back to our PENH committee
Correct.
for review.
Yeah.
Clear?
We'll do that.
We'll do that.
So, okay. So I need a mover for that motion. Moved by Nix, seconded by Mantalo. Any further discussion? All in favor? That carries. Okay, and we will take a 10-minute break.